Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Hartwell, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger in Pisgah National Forest for 11 years now, and before that, I grew up right here in these mountains. My daddy taught me to hunt when I was 8 years old, and I know every trail, every ridge, and every hunting spot in this whole area. People around here respect me because I'm fair but tough. When hunters break the rules, I catch them. When someone gets lost in the woods, I find them. And when folks talk about strange things happening in the forest, I usually have a simple answer that makes sense. I've hunted every ridge in these mountains, I always tell them. Ain't nothing out there I can't track or kill. But that was before what happened at Widow's Peak. November of 1987 was colder than usual. The weatherman kept talking about an early blizzard coming, and deer season was in full swing. Widow's Peak sits 30 miles from the nearest town, way up high where only the most serious hunters go. You need a good four-wheel drive truck just to get close, and even then you're walking the last few miles. The peak got its name from an old story about a woman during the Civil War. Her husband died fighting, and she went crazy with grief. People said she hunted Union soldiers in these woods, picking them off one by one like they were deer. The story goes she was never caught, never killed, just disappeared one day like smoke. Most folks think it's just a tall tale. I used to think so too. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when my radio crackled to life. It was Jim Peterson, one of the best hunting guides in the county. "Becca, you there?" "I'm here, Jim. What's going on?" His voice sounded shaky, which wasn't like him at all. Jim had guided hunters for 20 years, and nothing spooked him. "I need you to come up to Widow's Peak. Something ain't right up here." "What kind of something, There was a long pause. The kind that makes grown men run out of the woods. I grabbed my gear and headed up the mountain. The drive took an hour on winding dirt roads that got narrower and steeper as I climbed. Halfway up, snow started falling. Not normal snow, it came down in perfect straight lines like someone was drawing with a white pencil. When I reached the parking area, I found 3 trucks but no people. Jim's blue Chevy was there, along with 2 others I didn't recognize. Fresh tire tracks showed they'd all arrived that morning. I called out, but my voice seemed to get swallowed by the trees. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no wind in the branches. Just silence so thick it felt heavy on my shoulders. I found Jim about a quarter mile up the trail. He was sitting on a fallen log, staring at the ground. His rifle lay beside him, and his hands were shaking. "Jim, you okay?" He looked up at me with eyes that had seen something terrible. "Becca, I've been hunting these woods for 20 years. I know what belongs here and what don't." "What happened?" "I found something up by the old hunting blind. Something that ain't natural." He led me another half mile up a steep trail covered in fresh snow. The blind was an old wooden platform built in a tree, the kind hunters used to stay hidden while waiting for deer. But when we got there, I saw what had spooked Jim. The blind was facing the wrong way. Instead of looking out over the clearing where deer might come to feed, it was turned around, facing back toward the trail, and there was an old rifle mounted there, pointing down at us like whoever built this was hunting people, not animals. "That ain't the strangest part," Jim said. He pointed to some trees near the blind. "Look at those arrows." Stuck in the bark of 3 different trees were arrows. Not modern hunting arrows, with metal tips, but old wooden ones with stone points. They were all at the same height, right where a man's chest would be if he was walking the trail. "Someone's trying to scare hunters." "Away," I said, though my voice didn't sound as confident as I wanted it to. "Maybe," Jim said, "but I found 2 other hunting parties up here this morning. They all said the same thing. Their GPS stopped working right when they got near the peak, started leading them in circles. I pulled out my own GPS unit and checked it. The screen showed our location jumping around like we were moving, even though we were standing still. Equipment fails sometimes, I said. Could be the cold weather. But even as I said it, I was looking at those arrows again. The wood was dark and old, but the points looked sharp and new. And there was something else. The trees they were stuck in had grown around them, like the arrows had been there for years and years. Jim, you said you found other hunters? The Bradley brothers were here around dawn, Tom and Mike, real experienced guys, but when I saw them, they looked scared out of their minds. Said something was following them through the woods, something that walked on two legs but wasn't quite human. My skin crawled, but I kept my voice steady. Where are they now? Gone. Packed up and left fast as they could. But there was another group. 3 guys from Virginia. They were heading up to the peak itself when I last saw them. We needed to find those hunters. As the snow got heavier, I could feel the temperature dropping. If someone was lost up here, or if there really was a person trying to hurt hunters, we had to act fast. Show me where you saw them last, I said. Jim shook his head. I ain't going back up there, Becca. Something's wrong with this mountain today. Real wrong. I looked up the trail toward Widow's Peak. Through the falling snow, I could barely see the outline of the summit. Somewhere up there, 3 hunters might be in trouble. Then wait here, I said. I'll go find them. Don't go alone. But I was already started, nang up the trail. Behind me, I heard Jim call out once more. Becca, if you see anything strange, you run. You hear me? You run and don't look back. The snow was falling harder now, and the silence in the woods felt deeper than ever. My boots crunched in the snow as I climbed, and each step seemed to echo longer than it should have. I was a ranger. I was trained for this. I could handle whatever was up there. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The trail to Widow's Peak got steeper and more narrow as I climbed. Snow covered everything now, making the familiar path look strange and different. My breath came out in white puffs, and ice was already forming on my eyebrows and the edges of my hat. About halfway to the summit, I found the first sign of the Virginia hunters. Fresh boot prints in the snow, 3 sets of them. The prints were deep and clear, showing they'd passed by maybe an hour ago. I followed the trail, calling out every few minutes. Hello? Anyone up there? My voice bounced off the trees and faded away. No answer came back. The boot prints led me off the main trail onto a smaller path I'd never noticed before. It wound through thick pine trees that blocked out most of the daylight. Even though it was only afternoon, it felt like evening under those dark branches. That's when I found the first Virginia hunter. His name was Tom Bradley. I could tell from the hunting license pinned to his jacket. He was sitting with his back against a tree, his rifle across his lap, staring straight ahead with wide, empty eyes. Tom? Tom, can you hear me? I knelt down next to him and checked for a pulse. He was alive, but barely breathing. His skin was cold and pale, and when I shook his shoulder, he didn't respond at all. Then I saw the wound. There was a hole in his jacket right through the chest area, but when I opened the jacket to look, I found something impossible. The hole went all the way through his body, but it had been treated. Someone had cleaned the wound and bandaged it with strips of old cloth. The bandages looked like they came from the Civil War era, rough, hand-torn fabric that should have rotted away more than 100 years ago. Tom, who did this to you? Who helped you? His eyes moved slightly and his lips tried to form words. I leaned closer to hear. The widow, he whispered. She's gathering her army. Then his eyes rolled back and he passed out completely. I radioed for help but got only static. The storm was getting worse, and we were too far from any radio towers. I needed to get Tom to a hospital, but first I had to find the other 2 hunters. I made Tom as comfortable as I could and continued following the tracks. They led deeper into the woods to a part of the mountain I'd never explored before. The trees here were older and bigger, and some of them had strange marks carved into their bark. The marks looked like letters and numbers, but they were faded and hard to read. I stopped at one tree and brushed away the snow. The carving said, CSA, 1863, Remember the Fallen. Confederate States of America. Civil War soldiers had been here. A stick cracked behind me, and I spun around with my hand on my gun. Nothing there but falling snow and dark trees. But I had the strangest feeling that someone was watching me. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The only answer was the soft whisper of snow hitting the ground. I found the second hunter 20 yards further up the trail. Carl Peterson was lying on his back in a clearing covered by a thin layer of snow. Like Tom, he had a wound in his chest, and like Tom, someone had treated it with old-fashioned bandages. But Carl was unconscious, and his breathing was so shallow I could barely see his chest moving. Next to him was something that made my blood run cold. Someone had built a shelter out of pine branches and canvas. Inside the shelter were medical supplies, but not modern ones. There were glass bottles with handwritten labels, metal tools that looked like they belonged in a museum, and rolls of cloth bandages, just like the ones wrapped around Carl's chest. It looked like a field hospital from the Civil War. I was examining the supplies when I heard voices. They were coming from deeper in the woods, too far away for me to understand the words. But something about them sounded wrong. The voices were speaking English, but the accent was different. Old-fashioned, like actors in a historical movie. I drew my gun and moved toward the voices. The trail led to the edge of a steep cliff. Below me was a valley I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of this mountain. Through the falling snow, I could make out shapes moving around down there. People in gray uniforms. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the valley. What I saw made me question my own sanity. There were about 20 men down there, all dressed like Confederate soldiers. They had the right uniforms, the right equipment, even the right flags. They were moving in formation, like they were drilling for battle, and standing in front of them, giving orders, was a woman in a black dress. Even from this distance, I could see she was carrying an old rifle. Her voice drifted up to me on the wind, and I caught a few words. "Yankees in the area. Maintain your positions. Show no mercy." I watched in amazement as the soldiers spread out through the valley in perfect military formation. These weren't just people playing dress-up. They moved like real soldiers, like they'd been doing this for years, but that was impossible. The Civil War ended in 1865. These people should all be dead. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, gun raised, and found myself face to face with a man I'd never seen before. He was middle-aged, wearing a heavy coat and thick glasses, and he looked as scared as I felt. "Don't shoot," he said, raising his hands. "I'm Professor James Mitchell from Appalachian State University. I got your radio call for help." "I didn't radio anyone." "Someone did," said there were injured hunters up here, and they needed help with historical research. He looked down into the valley. "My God, is that what I think it is?" "I don't know what it is," I said, lowering my gun. "But I found 2 hunters shot and treated with Civil War medical supplies. And now there's a whole company of Confederate soldiers down there." Professor Mitchell pulled out his own binoculars and studied the scene below. His hands were shaking as he focused the lenses. "That's not possible," he muttered. But the formations are perfect. The uniforms are exactly right. Even the flags." He lowered the binoculars and looked at me with wide eyes. "I've studied this period for 20 years. Everything down there is completely authentic." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying either someone has spent a fortune creating the most accurate Civil War reenactment in history, or we're looking at the real thing." The wind picked up, carrying more voices from the valley. This time I could hear them clearly. "Patrol reports enemy movement on the ridge. Ready the rifles. The widow says to take prisoners if possible." "They're talking about us," I said. Professor Mitchell nodded grimly. "I think we need to get out of here. Right now." But as we turned to leave, we found our path blocked. 3 men in Confederate gray uniforms stood on the trail behind us. They had rifles pointed at our chests, and their faces were pale as moonlight. When they spoke, their voices sounded like they were coming from far away. "You will come with us," one of them said. "The widow wishes to speak with you." I raised my gun, but Professor Mitchell grabbed my arm. "Don't," he whispered. "Look at their eyes." I looked. The soldiers' eyes were empty black holes, like someone had scooped out everything that made them human. "What are you?" I asked. The lead soldier smiled, showing teeth like old Yell. "Our bones." "We are the army of Widow's Peak," he said, "and you are our prisoners." The ghostly soldiers marched us down into the valley at gunpoint. Up close, they looked even more wrong than they had from the cliff. Their uniforms were perfect replicas, but their skin was gray and cold-looking, and when they moved, they made no sound at all. Professor Mitchell walked beside me, whispering under his breath. "This is incredible," he kept saying. "The historical accuracy is perfect. The weapons, the formations, even the way they talk. It's like we've stepped back in time." "These aren't reenactors," I told him. "Look at their faces." He looked and went quiet. The valley was bigger than it had seemed from above. Dozens of tents were set up in neat rows with a large command tent in the center. Soldiers moved between the tents with military precision, cleaning weapons, cooking food over campfires, and standing guard. Everything looked exactly like a Civil War army camp, except for one thing. It was completely silent. No talking, no laughing, no normal camp sounds. Just the whisper of feet moving through snow. They brought us to the command tent and pushed us inside. The woman in the black dress was waiting for us. She was tall and thin, with long dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders. Her dress was the kind wealthy women wore during the Civil War, black silk with a high collar and long sleeves. But her face was what made my skin crawl. She was beautiful, but in a cold, dead way. Like a statue carved from white marble. Her eyes were the same empty black holes I'd seen in the soldiers. "Welcome to my mountain," she said. Her voice was soft and pleasant, but underneath it was something sharp and dangerous. "I am Sarah Blackwood, and you are trespassing on military territory." "Military territory?" I said. "Lady, the Civil War ended over 100 years ago." She sighed, mild, and her teeth were perfect white pearls. "The war never ended for me, Ranger Hartwell. It simply continued." Professor Mitchell stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're the widow of Widow's Peak? But that's impossible. You'd be over 150 years old." "Death has a way of preserving one's appearance," she said. "Tell me, Professor, what do you know about my war?" "I know your husband died at Gettysburg. I know you came to these mountains seeking revenge against Union soldiers. I know you disappeared in 1863 and were never found." "I didn't disappear," Sarah said. "I evolved. I discovered that death is not the end of service. It's simply a new beginning." She walked to a table covered with maps and papers. Everything looked old and yellowed, but the ink was fresh. "My husband died for a cause he believed in. When I learned of his death, I swore an oath to continue his fight by any means necessary. I came to these mountains and began my own war against the Yankees." "That was over a century ago," I said. "Time means nothing to the dead, Ranger. My war continued long after Appomattox. Every Union soldier who entered my territory became part of my army. Every hunter, every hiker, every fool who thought they could claim my mountain." Professor Mitchell was staring at the maps. "These are battle plans, modern battle plans." Sarah nodded. "I've had many years to perfect my strategy. Each person who dies on this mountain joins my army. Each soul I claim makes me stronger." "The hunters," I said. "Tom Bradley and Carl Peterson. What did you do to them?" "I recruited them. Mr. Bradley has already taken the oath and joined my regiment. Mr. Peterson will follow soon, once his wounds heal." "They're not dead. I saw them breathing." Sarah's smile got wider. "Death comes in many forms, Ranger. The body can live while the spirit serves a higher purpose. My soldiers are proof of that." I looked around the tent and noticed something that chilled me to the bone. There were dozens of modern items mixed in with the Civil War stuff. Hunting licenses, driver's licenses, watches, and wallets, all from different time periods, spanning decades. "How many people have you killed?" "I prefer the term recruited. And the answer is Everyone who has threatened my territory. Hunters, hikers, park rangers, law enforcement officers. All now serve in my eternal army. Professor Mitchell picked up one of the licenses. This is from 1972, and this one's from 1981. You've been doing this for decades. I've been doing this since 1863, Sarah corrected. The mountain provides, and I take what the mountain gives me. You're insane, I said. Her eyes flashed with anger. I'm a patriot. I'm fighting for my homeland, my family, my beliefs. What are you fighting for, Ranger? Before I could answer, one of the ghostly soldiers entered the tent. Report, Sarah commanded. We found the third Yankee hunter hiding near the ridge. He put up a fight. Is he alive? Barely, but he'll make a good addition to the company. Sarah turned back to us. You see, the mountain continues to provide recruits. Soon, my army will be large enough to march down from these peaks and reclaim the South. That's crazy, I said. The war is over. The South lost. The war is never over, she screamed, and for a moment her beautiful face twisted into something horrible and inhuman. Not while I draw a breath. Not while a single Yankee walks free on Southern soil. She took a deep breath and composed herself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I must deal with you two. Professor Mitchell, you will join my staff as a military advisor. Your knowledge of history will be valuable. I won't help you, he said. Oh, but you will. She walked over to him and placed her hand on his forehead. You see, the dead are very persuasive. Professor Mitchell's eyes went wide and then slowly turned black, just like the soldiers. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older, with a Southern accent. Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored to serve in your army. No! I grabbed his arm, but he pushed me away with surprising strength. And you, Ranger Hartwell, Sarah said, turning to me. You present a special case. What do you mean? I've done my research on you. Your great-great-grandfather was Thomas Hartwell of the 14th Pennsylvania Infantry. He fought at Gettysburg. My blood ran cold. I'd heard family stories about an ancestor who died in the Civil War, but I'd never paid much attention to them. He was there when my husband died, Sarah continued. Part of the regiment that overran our position. Your family owes me a debt. I don't owe you anything. Oh, but you do. The sins of the fathers, Ranger. Your ancestor helped kill my beloved. Now you will help me bring him back. That's impossible. You can't bring back the dead. Sarah laughed. I've been dead for over 100 years, and yet here I stand. Nothing is impossible for those with sufficient hatred. She walked to the tent entrance. Guards, take Ranger Hartwell to the medical tent. Prepare her for recruitment. Two ghostly soldiers grabbed my arms. Their grip was ice-cold and strong as steel. Wait, I said. What about the hunters? Tom and Carl and the third one? They're being prepared for service. By tomorrow night, they'll be full members of my regiment. And soon after that, so will you. As the soldiers dragged me out of the tent, I caught one last glimpse of Professor Mitchell. He was bent over the battle plans, pointing out positions and movements with the enthusiasm of a true believer. Sarah had recruited him in seconds. How long did I have before she did the same thing to me? The medical tent was the same field hospital setup I'd found next to Carl Peterson. Inside, Tom Bradley lay on a cot, staring at the ceiling with those empty black eyes. He was alive, but everything that made him human was gone. A ghostly doctor in a blood-stained apron approached me with a syringe. This won't hurt, he said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. You'll simply sleet. Pee until your transformation is complete. I struggled against the soldiers holding me, but their grip was too strong. The needle came closer to my arm. That's when I heard the sound that saved my life. Gunshots, coming from outside the tent. The ghostly doctor paused, and the soldiers loosened their grip just enough for me to break free. I grabbed a scalpel from the medical supplies and slashed at the nearest soldier. The blade passed right through him, like he was made of fog. More gunshots outside. Someone was fighting Sarah's army. I ran for the tent entrance just as everything went to hell. The ghostly army was in chaos. Rifle shots echoed through the valley as dozens of Confederate soldiers fired at targets I couldn't see. but their bullets were passing right through living trees and rocks, causing no damage at all. Then I saw who they were shooting at, the 3rd Virginia hunter, the one they'd said they captured. His name was Mike Bradley, Tom's brother. He was alive, very much alive, and he was fighting back with everything he had. He'd found higher ground on the valley rim and was picking off the ghost soldiers with his hunting rifle. But here's the strange part. His bullets were actually hitting them. Every time Mike fired, one of the ghostly soldiers would stumble and fade away like smoke. His rifle shouldn't have been able to hurt them at all, but somehow it was working. "The iron!" Professor Mitchell shouted from across the camp. His voice sounded more like his own now, as if Sarah's control was weakening. "Cold iron disrupts the spiritual energy." That made sense. Mike's rifle had an iron barrel and iron bullets. The ghost soldiers' weapons were authentic Civil War replicas. No iron, just steel and lead. I needed to get to Mike, but the camp was crawling with ghostly soldiers. As I ran between the tents trying to stay hidden, I heard Sarah screaming orders. "Flank him from the east! Cut off his retreat! No one leaves my mountain alive!" A ghostly soldier appeared in front of me, raising his musket. I dove to the side just as he fired. The musket ball passed right through the spot where I'd been standing and buried itself in a tree. I kept running, dodging between tents and supply wagons. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice getting closer. "Find the ranger. She's the key to everything." I reached the edge of the camp and started climbing toward Mike's position. The slope was steep and covered with loose rocks that made climbing treacherous. Below me, I could hear the ghost army giving chase. Halfway up the cliff face, I found a narrow ledge where I could rest and catch my breath. Looking back down into the valley, I could see the full scope of Sarah's army for the first time. There weren't just 20 or 30 soldiers. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They filled the entire valley floor like a gray tide of death. Some wore Confederate uniforms. Others wore clothes from different time periods, hunters and hikers from every decade since the 1860s. All of them had the same empty black eyes. All of them had been recruited to Sarah's eternal war. Impressive, isn't it? I spun around and found Sarah Blackwood standing on the ledge beside me. She'd appeared without making a sound, and her black dress wasn't even wrinkled from the climb. "Every soul who died on this mountain," she said, gazing proudly at her army. "Every person who thought they could take what belongs to me. Now, they serve a higher purpose." "This isn't a higher purpose," I said. "This is madness. This is justice." Her beautiful face twisted with rage. "Your people took everything from me. My husband, my home, my future. So I took everything from your people in return. The war ended over a century ago. Everyone who fought in it is dead. The war never ends. It just changes battlefields." She stepped closer to me, and I could smell something cold and rotten beneath her perfume. "Do you know what your ancestor did at Gettysburg? He bayoneted my husband while he was trying to surrender, ran him through like an animal, and left him to die in agony." "I don't believe you." "Belief is irrelevant. I was there. I saw it happen." Her eyes filled with tears that looked like drops of black ink. "Thomas was carrying a letter from me, a letter telling him I was carrying his child." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You were pregnant?" 6 months. We were going to name the baby James, after Thomas's father." The tears were streaming down her face now, leaving dark stains on her white cheeks. "Your ancestor killed not just my husband, but my unborn son." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "But that doesn't justify what you've done here." "Doesn't it?" She wiped away the black tears. "I've spent 124 years building an army to avenge them. Every person who dies on this mountain brings me closer to justice. This isn't justice. It's revenge." "What's the difference?" Before I could answer, another rifle shot echoed from above us. Mike Bradley was still fighting, but I could hear the desperation in his shots now. He was running out of ammunition. "Your friend won't last much longer," Sarah said. "And when he falls, I'll have my complete victory. 3 hunters recruited in a single day. A park ranger and a professor to add to my command staff. It's been a very productive hunt." Why are you telling me all this? Because I want you to understand. When you join my army, I want you to serve willingly. I want you to hate as purely as I do. She raised her hand, and I felt something cold and dark trying to push into my mind. The same thing she'd done to Professor Mitchell. But I was ready for it this time. I closed my eyes and thought about everything that mattered to me. My father, who'd taught me to respect the woods, the hunters and hikers I'd helped over the years, the beauty of these mountains, and they weren't filled with the ghosts of old hatred. The cold feeling faded away. Sarah's eyes widened with surprise. How are you resisting? Because I don't carry your hate, I said. I never did. Then you'll die as you lived, she snarled. Uselessly! She lunged at me with claws that had replaced her fingers. I rolled to the side and her claws scraped sparks off the rock where I'd been standing. I scrambled to my feet and started climbing again. Behind me, Sarah's scream of rage shattered the air like breaking glass. I reached Mike's position just as he fired his last shot. 3 ghostly soldiers faded away, but dozens more were climbing toward us from all directions. Mike, you okay? He looked at me with wild, frightened eyes. Lady, I don't know what's happening here, but my brother Tom is down there, and he's not acting right. Your brother's been recruited by a ghost from the Civil War. We need to get out of here now. I'm not leaving without Tom. Tom's gone, Mike. Whatever's walking around in his body, it's not your brother anymore. Another wave of ghostly soldiers reached the top of the cliff. Mike swung his empty rifle like a club, and to my amazement, it actually knocked one of them down. The iron, I shouted. Iron hurts them. I looked around desperately for anything made of iron. My ranger badge was steel, useless. My gun was steel and aluminum, also useless. But my utility knife had an iron blade. I pulled it out just as a ghostly soldier grabbed for me. The iron blade sliced through his arm and he screamed and faded away. We need more iron, I told Mike. He pointed to a pile of old mining equipment half buried in the snow. Railroad spikes, he said. Pure iron. We fought our way to the equipment pile using Mike's rifle and my knife to clear a path. The railroad spikes were heavy and awkward, but they worked. Every time we hit a ghost soldier with one, he disappeared in a puff of gray smoke. But there were too many of them. For every soldier we destroyed, 2 more took his place. Sarah appeared at the edge of the cliff, floating a few inches off the ground. Her beautiful face was gone, replaced by something skeletal and horrible. Enough! She shrieked. I'll kill you both myself! She raised her hands, and every gun in her ghostly army turned toward us. Hundreds of muskets and rifles, all aimed at our position. Fire! Sarah commanded. But before the ghost soldiers could pull their triggers, a new voice cut through the air. Company, halt! Everyone froze. Sarah, the soldiers, even Mike and me. Professor Mitchell was walking up the trail toward us, but he looked different. He was wearing a Confederate officer's uniform, and he moved with military precision. Ma'am, he said to Sarah, snapping off a perfect salute, I've completed my analysis of the tactical situation. What analysis? Sarah demanded. You've been fighting the wrong war for 124 years. Sarah's skeletal face twisted with confusion. What do you mean? The Battle of Gettysburg, July 2nd, 1863. Your husband's regiment was the 37th Virginia Infantry, correct? Yes. They were overrun by the 14th Pennsylvania Infantry. Your husband was killed in the action. Bayoneted by a Yankee coward. Professor Mitchell shook his head. Ma'am, I've studied every battle report from that engagement. Thomas Blackwood was shot by Confederate friendly fire during the retreat. He was accidentally killed by his own side. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's horrific face went blank. That's impossible. I have the original Confederate casualty reports. Would you like to see them? He pulled out a folder of old papers. Even from where I stood, I could see the official Confederate seal on the documents. Sarah snatched the papers and read them frantically. As she read, her skeletal features began to shift back toward human. No, she whispered. No, this can't be right. Your husband died by accident, ma'am. The 14th Pennsylvania. It was 200 yards away when he fell. They never got close enough for bayonet fighting. Sarah's beautiful face was back, but now it was crumpled with grief instead of rage. I've been... Safe trips. The mountain provides excellent hunting, and no one has disappeared or gotten lost since that snowy day in November. But I still patrol the area regularly. Not because I think Sarah's ghost will return. I'm pretty sure she found the peace she was looking for. I patrol because I learned something important on that mountain. Grief can be a powerful force. When someone dies in anger or sadness, sometimes that emotion gets left behind, like an echo that won't fade away. Most of the time, those echoes are harmless. But sometimes, when the grief is deep enough and the anger is strong enough, they can become something more. I've never seen anything like Sarah Blackwood again, but I've learned to pay attention to the signs. When hunters report feeling watched, or when they find old artifacts in impossible places, I take it seriously, because you never know what kind of old pain might be hiding in these ancient mountains. My name is Rebecca Hartwell, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years now. I know every trail, every ridge, and every hunting spot in Pisgah National Forest, and I know that some things are worth more than hunting or hiking or any human activity. Some places hold memories that need to be respected, even when those memories are dark ones, especially when those memories are dark ones. The mountain is quiet now, but I'll keep listening, because in these old woods, you never know when the past might come calling again. But next time, I'll be ready for it. My name is Marcus Thompson, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a park ranger here in the Nantahala National Forest for 14 years now. Before that, I spent 8 years as a cop in Charlotte. I came to the mountains to get away from the city and all its problems. Out here, the worst thing I usually deal with is a lost hiker or a bear getting into someone's trash. I'm good at my job. Search and rescue is my specialty. When people get lost in these mountains, I'm the one they call. I know every trail, every creek, every hiding spot where someone might take shelter. After 20 years of dealing with people's problems, I've learned to tell the difference between real danger and campfire ghost stories. That's why I didn't worry much when Linda Foster came to see me on that rainy Tuesday morning in June. Linda runs the summer camp up at Pine Ridge, and she's been my neighbor for 3 years. Good woman. Her daughter Sarah was part of the group that was now 3 days overdue from their wilderness trek. "Mark, I'm getting scared," Linda said, standing in my office doorway with rain dripping from her jacket. "They should have been back Sunday night. It's Tuesday now." I looked up from my paperwork. 20 kids and 6 counselors don't just disappear, but I'd seen plenty of groups run late because of weather or twisted ankles. "Where were they headed?" I asked. "Spider Creek," she said, "the old Cherokee trail that follows the water down to the valley." I frowned. Spider Creek was deep wilderness. The valley down there was cut off from everything, surrounded by steep ridges and thick forest. If someone got hurt down there, it would be hard to get them out. "Why Spider Creek?" I asked. "That's rough country for kids." Linda shrugged. "Mike Rodriguez planned the route. He's been doing this for 5 years. Said the kids would love seeing the waterfalls." I knew Mike. Good. Counselor. Careful with the kids. If he was 3 days late, something was wrong. "I'll head down there this morning," I told Linda. "Probably just had to wait out the storms. These creeks have been running high with all the rain we've been getting." The drive to the Spider Creek trailhead took an hour on winding mountain roads. The whole way, thick gray clouds hung low over the ridges. Rain had been falling for a week straight, and the forest felt heavy and dark. I parked at the empty trailhead and checked my gear. Radio, GPS, first aid kit, rope, emergency food, standard search and rescue stuff. I'd done this 100 times before. The trail down into Spider Creek Valley was slippery with mud and fallen leaves. The creek itself was running fast and brown with runoff. I could hear it roaring through the trees, much louder than usual. About a mile down the trail, I found the first sign something was wrong. Spider webs. Not just a few webs between trees, which would be normal. These webs stretched across the entire trail, some of them spanning 30 or 40 feet between the trunks. They were thick, almost rope-like, and covered with raindrops that made them shine like silver cables. I'd never seen anything like it. The webs were so dense I had to use my knife to cut through them just to keep walking, and they were strong, really strong. When I pushed on one with my hand, it barely moved. The deeper I went into the valley, the worse it got. Soon, the webs were everywhere, layer after layer of them stretching between the trees like some kind of giant net. Some were so thick I could probably walk on them. That's when I found the first piece of camping gear. A blue backpack hung about 20 feet up in the air, completely wrapped in webbing. Below it, a sleeping bag dangled like a cocoon. Both were too high to reach, suspended in the web network like decorations. My ready manos crackled with static when I tried to call back to headquarters. The signal was all wrong, like something was interfering with it. That's when I heard the sound. A soft clicking noise, coming from all around me, like fingers tapping on wood, but faster, much faster. I looked up into the trees and saw them. Spiders, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They covered every branch, every web strand, every surface I could see. Most were normal-sized, but some were huge. Wolf spiders with bodies as big as my fist and legs that stretched 6 inches in every direction. And they were all looking at me. I've seen a lot of weird things in the mountains over the years. Bears that acted strange, birds that flew in weird patterns, places where the forest just felt wrong. But this was different. This felt planned. The spiders weren't moving randomly like normal spiders do. They were organized. Some sat perfectly still on the outer edges of the big webs, like guards. Others moved in straight lines along the web strands, carrying things I couldn't make out from this distance. I cut my way deeper into the valley, following what was left of the trail. The clicking sounds got louder. My radio kept picking up weird interference, voices that sounded far away and distorted. 2 hours in, I found the first camp. 3 tents sat in a small clearing beside the creek, but they were wrong. The tents were wrapped in webbing so thick they looked like giant eggs. Gear was scattered everywhere, also wrapped in webs. A camp stove dangled 15 feet up in a tree, completely covered in silk. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" The clicking sound stopped. The forest went completely silent. Then I heard a voice. "Help me!" It came from one of the wrapped tents, weak and scared. I used my knife to cut through the webbing around the tent entrance. The silk was tough, like cutting through leather. Inside, I found Counselor Mike Rodriguez. He was alive, but barely. His skin was pale and wrinkled, like he'd been in water for days. His arms and legs were wrapped in thin strands of webbing that stuck to his skin. When I touched him, the webbing felt warm and slightly wet. "Mike, what happened here?" His eyes focused on me slowly. "They came at night," he whispered. "Started small. Just a few big ones. Then more. So many more." I cut the webbing off his arms and legs. Underneath, his skin was covered in small puncture wounds. Bite marks. "Where are the kids?" "They took them," Mike said. "Wrapped them up, carried them deeper into the valley." He grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Mark, these aren't normal spiders. They work together, like they're following orders." I helped Mike sit up. He was weak but could move. "We need to get you out of here." "You don't understand," he said. "I've been watching them for 2 days. They build. They plan. They're smart, Mark. Really smart." That's when I heard footsteps. Dr. Susan Chen emerged from the tree line, carrying a backpack and looking excited instead of scared. I knew Susan from the university. She studied spiders and other bugs. Good scientist, but sometimes got too interested in her work for her own good. "Mark, thank God you're here," she said. "This is incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "How did you get here?" I asked. "Linda called me yesterday when the group didn't come back. I drove up this morning." Susan looked around at all the webs with bright eyes. "Do you realize what we're looking at? Multiple spider species working together in ways that should be impossible. The web architecture alone is revolutionary." I stared at her. "Susan, people are missing. Kids are missing." I know," she said. but she was already pulling out a camera to take pictures of the webs. But we have to document this. The silk strength, the cooperative behavior, the communication methods. Mike grabbed my shirt. "Don't let her stay," he whispered. "They want her. They want all of us." So, that's when we heard the scream. It came from deeper in the valley, high-pitched and terrified. A kid's voice. "Sarah," Mike whispered. "Linda's daughter." I helped Mike to his feet. "Can you walk?" He nodded. "I think so." "Susan," I called. She was examining a web strand with a magnifying glass. "We're moving, now." "Just 5 more minutes," she said. "I need to collect samples." Another scream echoed through the valley. Closer this time. I grabbed Susan's backpack. "Move, now." We headed deeper into Spider Creek Valley, following the sound of the screams. Mike walked behind me, still weak but determined. Susan brought up the rear, stopping every few minutes to look at something that excited her. The webs got thicker as we went. Soon, we were walking through tunnels made of silk, with only small gaps to let in light. The clicking sounds returned, coming from all around us. "They're following us," Mike whispered. I looked back. He was right. Spiders moved along the web walls beside us, keeping pace but staying just out of reach. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. "This is amazing," Susan said. "They're exhibiting pack-hunting behavior. I've never seen spiders do anything like this." That's when we found Jenny Martinez. She was hanging in a cocoon about 10 feet off the ground, wrapped in silk, but still alive. Her eyes were open and aware, but her body looked wrong. Her arms and legs were too long, and they moved in ways that human limbs shouldn't move. "Jenny," I called up to her. "We're here to help." She turned her head toward us, and I saw that her eyes had changed. They were bigger than normal, and completely black. "Don't," she said in a voice that didn't quite sound human anymore. "They're trying to help us, make us better." "What do you mean?" I asked. Jenny smiled, and I saw that her teeth were pointed now. "They want to improve us, make us part of something bigger." Mike was backing away. "That's not Jenny anymore." "Yes, it is," Jenny said. "I'm still me, just better now, faster, stronger. I can see through their eyes, Mark, all of them, the whole forest." Susan stepped forward, fascinated. "Genetic integration? They're actually altering human biology?" "Susan, no," I warned. But Jenny was looking right at the scientist. "They want you especially," she told Susan. "You understand them. You could help them spread." That's when I saw the other cocoons, dozens of them hanging from trees throughout the forest around us, some small enough to hold children. Some were moving slightly, like something was alive inside. And that's when I realized the horrible truth. They were all still alive. "We have to cut them down," I said, looking up at all the cocoons hanging in the trees. "No," Jenny called from her web. "Don't hurt them. They're changing, becoming something wonderful." Mike grabbed my arm. "Mark, we need to leave, right now." But I couldn't leave those kids hanging there. I pulled out my rope and started looking for a way to climb up to the nearest cocoon. That's when Susan screamed. I spun around and saw a spider the size of a dinner plate sitting on her shoulder. Its legs were wrapped around her neck like a hug, and I could see 2 small puncture wounds where it had bitten her. "Get it off!" she yelled, trying to brush it away, but the spider held on tight. Susan stumbled and fell to her knees, her eyes going wide. "It's not hurting me," she said in a surprised voice. "It's talking to me." I grabbed a stick and knocked the spider off her. It scurried away into the web walls. "Susan, are you okay?" She stood up slowly, touching the bite marks on her neck. "I can hear them," she whispered. "All of them. They're beautiful." Mike was pulling on my sleeve. "We have to go. She's changing too." But Susan was walking toward the web walls, where hundreds of spiders sat watching us. "They don't want to hurt us," she said. "They want to make us part of their family." I grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Susan, listen to me. Those things are not your friends." "You don't understand," she said, but her voice sounded dreamy and far away. "They've been alone for so long, waiting for someone smart, enough to join them properly. That's when the real nightmare started. The spiders began moving, not just a few, but all of them. Thousands and thousands of spiders flowing along the web walls like a black river. They moved with purpose, following patterns that looked almost like military formations. "They're organizing," Mike whispered, "like an army." And they were. Some spiders took positions along the outer edges of the webs, like sentries. Others moved in straight lines toward specific points, carrying silk or small objects. A group of the largest spiders gathered around Jenny's cocoon and began working on something I couldn't see. "Fascinating," Susan said. "They have a command structure, a hierarchy." I was watching the spiders work when I heard a child crying. "Help me! Please! Somebody help me!" The voice came from above us. I looked up and saw a small cocoon about 20 feet up, with something moving inside it. "Sarah?" I called. "Mr. Thompson? Is that you?" It was Linda's daughter. She was alive. I threw my rope over a branch and started climbing. The spiders watched me but didn't try to stop me. Yet. When I reached Sarah's cocoon, I used my knife to cut through the silk. She was wrapped up tight, but she wasn't hurt. Not yet. "Are you okay, honey?" "I can't move my legs right," she said. "Something's wrong with them." I cut away more of the webbing around her legs and saw what she meant. Her legs were longer than they should be, and they bent in extra places, like they had more joints than normal human legs. "It doesn't hurt," Sarah said. "It just feels different." I picked her up and started carrying her down the rope. But when we reached the ground, Sarah didn't want to walk normally. She wanted to crawl on her hands and feet, moving faster than any human should be able to crawl. "Sarah, walk like a person," I told her. "This is easier," she said. "And I can feel where all the safe paths are." Mike was staring at her. "How long has she been up there?" 2 days, Sarah said. "But it feels like longer. I can remember things from before I was born now." Susan was nodding excitedly. "Memory integration. They're sharing their genetic memory with the hosts." That's when we heard the real sound of terror. More screaming, but not from children this time. Adult voices, full of pain and fear. The voices came from deeper in the valley where the webs were thickest. "The other counselors," Mike said. We followed the sounds through the web tunnels. Sarah walked beside me, sometimes on 2 legs and sometimes on all 4s. Susan kept stopping to examine web structures and take notes. Mike stayed close to me, looking around nervously. The screaming got louder as we got deeper into the valley. Soon we could see shapes moving in the webs ahead of us. Human shapes, but wrong. The first one we found was Counselor Dave Patel. He was stuck in a web, but not wrapped up like the others. Instead, he was hanging spread-eagle between 2 trees, with thick web strands attached to his arms and legs. When he saw us, he started screaming again. "They're in my head," he yelled. "I can feel them in my brain." I could see why he was so scared. Dave's skin was changing color, getting darker and more patterned. His fingers were growing longer, and there were small hairs growing all over his arms. "How long has he been like this?" I asked Sarah. "Since yesterday morning," she said. "He fought it at first. That makes it hurt more." Susan was taking pictures. "Remarkable. The integration is much more advanced than in the girl." "Stop calling it integration," I snapped. "They're turning him into a monster." "Not a monster," Sarah said. "Something better." That's when I saw the thing that broke my mind. At the center of all the webs, in a clearing about 50 feet across, sat the biggest spider I'd ever seen. It was the size of a small car, with legs that stretched 15 feet in every direction. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it had human faces growing out of its body. Faces I recognized. Other campers and hikers who had gone missing over the past few years. Their faces were alive and aware, blinking and moving their mouths like they were trying to talk. "My God," Susan whispered. "A collective organism, multiple consciousness integrated into a single entity." The giant spider turned toward us, and I saw that the largest face in its body was a park ranger named Tom Bradley, who had disappeared 2 years ago. "Hello, Mark," Tom's face said. "We've been waiting for you." "Tom?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "What happened to you?" Tom's face smiled from the center of the massive spider's body. Other faces around him turned to look at me too. Men, women, even some children. All of them people who had gone missing in these mountains over the years. "We found a better way to live," Tom said. "No more loneliness, no more fear. We're all connected now. All part of something bigger and smarter than any of us were alone." The giant spider moved closer to us, its enormous legs stepping carefully around the web strands. I backed away, but there wasn't far to go. We were surrounded by webs and smaller spiders on all sides. "You're not Tom anymore," I said. "You're something else wearing his face." "I'm still Tom," the face insisted. "But I'm also Jenny and Dave and Karen from the hiking group last spring, and dozens of others. We share everything now. All our knowledge, all our memories, all our skills." Susan stepped forward, and I could see the spider bite on her neck was getting bigger and darker. "How does it work?" she asked. "The integration process." Another face on the spider's body answered, a woman I didn't recognize. "First, the bite. The venom changes your brain chemistry, makes you open to the connection. Then the silk, to keep you safe while your body adapts. Phenol, Huai, the merging. Your consciousness joins ours, and your body becomes part of our collective form." "It sounds wonderful," Susan said. The bite mark on her neck was spreading like a bruise, and her eyes were starting to look different, bigger and darker. "Susan, no," I said. "Fight it." But she was already walking toward the giant spider. "Think of what we could learn," she said. "All the knowledge of every species on Earth shared through one collective mind." Mike grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here. Now." He was right. But Sarah was standing next to the giant spider now, looking up at all the faces in its body. "Daddy?" she said to one of the faces. My blood went cold. Sarah's father had died in a hiking accident 3 years ago. His body was never found. "Hello, sweetheart," the face said. "Do you want to be with me again?" "Sarah, no!" I lunged forward and grabbed her, but she slipped out of my hands with inhuman speed and agility. "It's okay, Mr. Thompson," she said. "This way, I can be with Daddy forever." The giant spider was reaching toward Sarah with one of its massive legs when I did something desperate. I pulled out my emergency flare and lit it. The bright red flame filled the clearing with light, and something amazing happened. All the spiders around us started backing away. The smaller ones scattered into the web walls, and even the giant spider pulled back. "Fire," Mike whispered. "They're afraid of fire." "Not afraid," Tom's face said from the spider's body. "Cautious. Fire can damage the web network, break the connections between us." I pulled out my second flare and lit it too. Now I had one in each hand. "Sarah, come here," I called. The little girl looked confused, like she was fighting something in her head. I don't know what I want anymore." "Choose for yourself," I told her. "Not what they want, what you want." The giant spider was making angry clicking sounds, but it couldn't come closer without risking the flames. Susan was standing between me and the spider, looking torn. "The knowledge, Mark," she said. "Think of all the scientific advances we could make." "At the cost of your humanity?" I asked. "Evolution always has a cost." That's when I heard engines overhead, helicopter rotors. Someone had finally come looking for us. The rescue team had found the valley, but the spider collective heard it too. Tom's face looked up at the sky. "More humans," he said. "Good. We need more diversity in our collective." The giant spider began moving toward the edge of the clearing, heading for wherever the helicopter would try to land. Hundreds of smaller spiders flowed along the web walls beside it, following their queen. I realized this wasn't just about the missing campers anymore. The spider collective was planning to expand, to catch the rescue team and add them to its numbers too. "We have to stop them," I told Mike. "How?" he asked. We've got 2 flares and a knife against thousands of spiders. I looked around the clearing and noticed something important. All the webs were connected. Every single strand linked up to every other strand, creating one massive network that covered the entire valley. The webs, I said. It's all one big system. If we could damage the main connections. Mike caught on immediately. Cut the network, you cut their ability to coordinate. I started pulling emergency supplies out of my pack. More flares, a small camping stove, a bottle of camp fuel. "What are you doing?" Susan asked. She was still standing near the giant spider, but the bite mark on her neck had stopped spreading. "Something stupid," I said. "Mike, can you get to that main web junction over there?" He looked where I was pointing. A massive cluster of web strands came together about 30 feet away, held up by the biggest tree in the clearing. "Maybe, if you can keep the spiders busy." I opened the camp fuel and started pouring it on the web strands around us. The smell was sharp and chemic. "Dr. Mark, no!" Tom's face yelled from the spider's body. "You'll hurt all of us!" "That's the idea," I said. I lit my 3rd flare and touched it to the fuel-soaked webs. The fire spread faster than I expected. Within seconds, flames were running along web strands in every direction, lighting up the entire clearing like daylight. The spiders went crazy. They scattered in all directions, clicking and chittering in panic. Even the giant spider backed away from the spreading flames. "Now!" I yelled to Mike. He ran toward the big web junction and started cutting strands with his knife. Each cut seemed to cause problems throughout the network. Spiders fell from broken webs, and the coordinated movements turned into chaos. But the fire was spreading too fast. Soon the whole valley would be burning. "Sarah," I called, "come on!" The little girl ran to me, moving like a normal human child for the first time since I'd found her. Whatever the spiders had done to her was breaking down as the web network failed. "Susan," I called. She looked back at me and I could see her fighting an internal battle. The spider bite was telling her to stay, but her human mind was telling her to run. I can't," she said. "I can hear them calling to me." "Fight it," I yelled. "You're stronger than they are." The giant spider was trying to retreat to a part of the valley where the fire hadn't reached yet, but Mike had cut too many connection points. Its movements were uncoordinated now, more like a regular animal than an intelligent creature. Susan took a step toward me, then another. With each step, she seemed more like herself. "The helicopter," Mike called. "I can hear it getting closer." "Everyone move," I yelled. "Head for the creek." We ran through the burning web forest, dodging falling flames and panicked spiders. Sarah kept up easily, but Susan stumbled and fell behind. I went back for her. She was sitting on the ground, holding her head. "It hurts," she said. "They're screaming in my head." "That means you're breaking free," I told her. "Come on, we're almost out." Helped her to her feet, and we ran after Mike and Sarah. Behind us, I could hear the giant spider making sounds I'd never heard before. Not clicking anymore, but something like crying. The faces in its body were all talking at once, calling out names and begging for help. We reached the creek just as the helicopter appeared overhead. It was a Park Service rescue chopper, and they were already lowering ropes into the valley. The official report said we found the missing campers trapped in a flash flood cave system and had to burn some debris to signal for rescue. 8 kids and 2 counselors were saved. The others were listed as victims of the flood. Their bodies never recovered. Sarah spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain why her bone structure had changed so much, but she was alive and gradually getting back to normal. Linda was grateful just to have her daughter back. Susan recovered fully from the spider bite, but she never talked about what happened in the valley. She took early retirement from the university and moved to Florida, as far from the mountains as she could get. Mike went back to counseling kids at summer camp, but he never took groups into the deep wilderness anymore. Just day hikes and nature walks close to the main roads. I kept working as a park ranger, but I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. Missing hikers who were never found, areas where wildlife behaved strangely, reports of unusual spider activity. The Spider Creek Valley was officially closed to the public. The story was environmental damage from the fire, but the real reason was what we found when we went back a month later. The webs were already growing back, not as big or organized as before, but they were there. And some of the burned trees had strange markings on them, patterns that looked almost like writing. I started keeping a map of every missing person case in the Appalachian Mountains over the past 20 years. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. The disappearances moved from valley to valley, always in areas with lots of water and thick forest cover. The spider collective wasn't gone. We just set them back a few months, maybe years if we were lucky. But they were learning from what happened, getting smarter, more careful. Last month, a family of hikers went missing near Cradle Creek, about 50 miles north of Spider Creek. Search teams found their campsite abandoned, with all their gear still there. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away, but there were webs in the trees around the camp. Not very many, and not very big, just enough to make me worry. I've started carrying a lot more fire supplies when I go on patrol now. Flares, lighter fluid, waterproof matches. The other rangers think I'm paranoid, but they didn't see what I saw in Spider Creek Valley. They didn't hear Tom Bradley's face calling out for help as the fires consumed the web network, and they don't know what I figured out in those last few minutes before the rescue helicopter arrived. The giant spider wasn't the original creature, it was just another victim, like Tom and all the others. Something had taken them and changed them into what they became. But I never found out what that original creature was. It's still out there somewhere, in the deep valleys where humans rarely go. Waiting, planning, learning from its mistakes, building new webs, finding new victims. And sometimes, when I'm alone on night patrol and the forest gets very quiet, I can hear clicking sounds in the distance, soft and careful, like fingers tapping out a message, like something calling to others of its kind, letting them know it's time to start spreading again. I keep my flares close and my radio on, but I know that if they really weigh at me, there won't be much I can do to stop them. The mountains are big, and there are a lot of places where a person could disappear forever. All I can do is keep watching, keep listening, and hope that when they come for me, I'll see them coming in time to light a fire that burns bright enough to warn others. Because the weavers of Spider Creek aren't finished with their work. They're just getting started. My name is Joseph Kowalski, but everyone calls me Joey. I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal campers, you name it. But I never thought I'd be standing here in the freezing cold, listening to dead men sing. It started 3 days ago. The geology team from the university called our office, all worked up about something they found at the old Blackstone mine. Ranger Kowalski, the lead scientist, said over the crackling radio, "You need to get up here. We're hearing voices underground." I almost laughed. "Doc, that mine's been sealed since 1952. Only thing down there is bad air and cave-ins." "That's what we thought too," he said. "But we've got equipment that doesn't lie." The drive up to Blackstone took 2 hours on roads that barely deserved the name. Snow had been falling for days, and my truck's heater was working overtime. The mine sat in a valley surrounded by bare trees that looked like skeleton fingers against the gray sky. 3 concrete-sealed entrances marked where men used to disappear into the earth every morning, hoping to come home alive. I knew this place too well. My dad worked here until the explosion that killed 47 miners and shut everything down. He was one of the lucky ones. Got laid off the week before it happened. God was watching over us, he always said. But I think it just made him feel guilty that his friends died while he lived. The geology team had set up their equipment near the main entrance. Dr. Kim, a thin Korean-American guy with thick glasses, met me at my truck. "Ranger, thank God you're here," he said, breath making little clouds in the cold air. "Listen to this." He led me to a machine covered in dials and screens. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. "We're using ground-penetrating "A DAR to check for gas leaks," he explained. "Standard procedure before any mining company can think about reopening. But look at these readings." The screen showed waves and lines that meant nothing to me. But Dr. Kim pointed to a section that pulsed in a steady rhythm. "That's acoustic activity," he said. "Multiple human voices harmonizing in perfect pitch, coming from about 200 feet down." "Doc, that's impossible. Those tunnels have been sealed for 26 years. "I know. That's why we called you." He handed me a pair of headphones. "Just listen." The sound hit me like a punch to the chest. Men's voices, singing an old hymn my dad used to hum while he got ready for work. "Amazing Grace," clear as church bells on Sunday morning. Maybe 20 or 30 voices, all blending together like they'd been practicing for years. I pulled off the headphones. "That has to be some kind of echo, whine through the shafts or something." "That's what we thought," said Patricia Walsh, the team leader. She was a tough-looking woman with graying hair pulled back tight. But wind doesn't sing in four-part harmony, and wind doesn't know the words to hymns. I walked over to the main entrance. The concrete seal looked exactly like it had for decades, solid, uncracked, with the date 1952 still visible in the old cement. But something felt wrong. The air around it was warm, like heat was coming from inside. And I could swear I smelled something that didn't belong. The scent of fresh coffee and tobacco, like men taking their morning break. "When did you first notice this?" I asked. "Yesterday morning," Dr. Kim said. "Started around 6 a.m. and went until about 2 in the afternoon. 8 hours, just like a work shift." My skin crawled. "What time did the shift start back in 52? Patricia checked her notes. "According to the mining company records, day shift was 6 to 2. W's. He stood there in the cold, looking at each other. None of us wanted to say what we were all thinking. "There's got to be a logical explanation," I said, mostly trying to convince myself. "Maybe some homeless guys found a way in through an old ventilation shaft." "We checked," Patricia said. "Every entrance is sealed tight, no way in or out." That's when we heard it again, this time without the headphones, drifting up from the ground like it was coming through solid rock. Men's voices singing, "In the Sweet By and By," my dad's favorite hymn, the same one they played at his funeral 5 years ago. I felt something cold run down my spine that had nothing to do with the February weather. "We need to call the state office," I said, "and maybe the sheriff. This is way above my pay grade." But even as I said it, I knew we wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. Something was calling to us from down in that darkness, and I had a terrible feeling it knew exactly who we were. The sheriff couldn't make it up until tomorrow, said the roads were too bad and he was dealing with a pileup on the interstate. That left me, the geology team, and whatever was singing beneath our feet. We set up camp in the old mining office, a brick building that somehow still had electricity running to it. The power company said they'd never turned it off, just kept charging the bill to some account that nobody questioned. While Dr. Kim and his team ran more tests, I dug through boxes of old mining records Patricia had brought from the county courthouse. The story of the Blackstone mine explosion got worse the more I read. 47 men died, but their bodies were never recovered. The company said the cave-in was too dangerous to dig through. They sealed the mine, paid out insurance money to the families, and walked away. Case closed. But there were handwritten notes in the margins of some reports. Notes that talked about safety violations, faulty equipment, and miners who'd been complaining about dangerous conditions for months. The company ignored every warning. "Just like always," I uttered, thinking about my dad's stories of bosses who cared more about coal quotas than keeping men alive. "Find something interesting?" Patricia asked, looking over my shoulder. "Same old story. Company cuts corners, workers die, and everybody pretends it was just an accident." Around 4 o'clock, the singing stopped. The sudden silence felt heavier than the cold. Dr. Kim's equipment showed nothing. No voices, no movement, no signs of life below. It was like someone had just switched off a radio. "End of shift," I said without thinking. "What?" "Nothing. Just..." My dad always said the mine got quiet when the day shift ended. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices. But around midnight, something new started. Not singing this time. Talking. Low voices having conversations I couldn't quite make out, like listening to people in the next room through thin walls. I got dressed and walked outside. The talking was clearer in the cold air, coming from the direction of the sealed entrances. I grabbed a flashlight and walked closer, my boots crunching in the snow. Told you that support beam wasn't safe? Company don't care, long as we keep digging. My wife's gonna have the baby next month, need this job. My hands shook, and not from the cold. These were the kinds of conversations my dad used to tell me about. Miners talking during their breaks, sharing their worries and fears. But these men had been dead for 26 years. I clicked on my flashlight and aimed it at the main entrance. The beam reflected off the concrete seal, but for just a second, I could swear I saw something else. A figure in mining clothes and a hard hat, standing just on the other side, looking right at me. I stumbled backward and nearly fell. When I got the light steady again, there was nothing there, just cold concrete and silence. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that face. It looked exactly like the pictures of my dad when he was young. The next morning, Dr. Kim was missing. Patricia found his sleeping bag empty, around 7 a.m. His equipment was still running, showing the same acoustic patterns as before, voices singing hymns and talking about their work. But Dr. Kim was nowhere to be found. Maybe he went for a walk, I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. We spent 2 hours searching the area around the mine. His footprints led from the office building straight to the main entrance, then just stopped, like he'd walked right through solid concrete. "This is crazy," Patricia muttered, studying the tracks with her flashlight. "People don't just disappear." That's when we heard Dr. Kim's voice. It came from underground, muffled but clear. He was talking to someone, his words mixed in with the other conversations we'd been hearing. "Fascinating acoustic properties down here. Research like this could change everything. Yes, I'd like to stay and study." Patricia pressed her ear against the sealed entrance. "Bob? Bob, can you hear me?" The talking stopped. Then Dr. Kim's voice came again, but different somehow, distant and dreamy, like he was talking in his sleep. "Tell my wife I'm working late tonight. Important research, very important. Bob, you need to come up here right now." But there was no answer, just the sound of men going back to work. Tools scraping against rock, carts rolling on metal tracks, and voices calling out mining terms I remembered from my dad's stories. I radioed for backup, but the response crackled with static. The weather was getting worse, and it would be at least another day before help could reach us. We were on our own with whatever had taken Dr. Kim. That afternoon, Patricia's graduate student, a kid named Marcus, decided to investigate one of the side entrances. I tried to stop him, but he was young and convinced he could figure out a scientific explanation for everything. I found him 3 hours later, sitting in tea, the snow about 20 feet from the sealed tunnel, staring at the concrete like he was watching a movie. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He looked up at me with glassy eyes. "They're so sad, Mr. Kowalski. They miss their families." "Who? Who's sad?" "The miners. They don't understand why their wives and children never visit. They keep asking me to tell them they're okay." I grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "Marcus, there's nobody there. It's just concrete." But even as I said it, I could hear them too. Voices calling out names, asking about people who'd been dead for decades. And underneath it all, that sad, beautiful singing that seemed to come from the earth itself. Marcus started to stand up like he was going to walk toward the entrance. I held him back, but his strength surprised me. It was like something was pulling him forward. "Let me go," he said in that same dreamy voice Dr. Kim had used. "They need someone to keep records, someone to make sure the work gets done right." I dragged him away from the entrance and back to the office, but I could see in his eyes that part of him was already gone. Whatever was down in that mine wasn't just singing anymore, it was recruiting. By the third day, I knew we were in serious trouble. Marcus wouldn't eat or sleep, just sat by the window staring at the mine entrances, humming hymns under his breath. Patricia tried to get him to leave with her, but he refused to go more than a few hundred yards from the mine before turning back like he was being pulled by invisible ropes. "We need to get out of here," Patricia said for the 10th time. "Call in the National Guard, the FBI, whoever handles this kind of thing." "And tell them what? That a sealed coal mine is singing and kidnapping people? They'll think we're crazy." But I was starting to think crazy might be the right word for what was happening to us. The voices from undershot ground were getting louder and clearer. I could make out individual conversations now, and they were talking about things that made my blood run cold. "New fellows came down today. Real, helpful. That Korean fellow knows all about testing for gas. Young ones got good handwriting, perfect for the reports." They were talking about Dr. Kim and Marcus like they were new employees who'd just started their first day of work. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I drove down to the county library in town and spent hours going through old newspapers and mining company records. What I found made everything make horrible sense. The Blackstone mine explosion wasn't an accident. It was murder. According to witness statements that were never included in the official report, the miners had been planning a strike. They wanted better safety equipment and hazard pay for working in dangerous conditions. The company refused and hired thugs to break up union meetings. On the morning of February 15, 1952, someone had tampered with the ventilation system and planted explosives in the main tunnel. The plan was to scare the miners back to work. Instead, it killed 47 men and trapped them forever in collapsed tunnels. But the worst part was in a letter I found tucked inside an old mining journal. It was written by a company supervisor named Frank Morrison to his boss. "The union troublemakers have been dealt with permanently. Recommend sealing all entrances immediately and declaring the site too dangerous for body recovery. This will end the strike and serve as an example to other facilities." 47 men murdered for wanting to work safely and provide for their families. And now they were still down there, still trying to do their jobs, not understanding that they were dead. I drove back to the mine in a snowstorm, my headlights barely cutting through the blowing snow. What I found when I got there made me wish I'd kept driving. Marcus was gone. So was Patricia. But their voices joined the others underground, talking about their new assignments and how grateful they were for the work. I was alone with the mine, and it knew I was there. "Joseph Kowalski," came a voice from beneath my feet, old and gravelly like a man who'd spent his life breathing coal dust. "You're Tommy Kowalski's boy, ain't you?" My knees almost gave out. Who's asking?" "Name's Bill Sullivan. Worked alongside your daddy for 8 years before that bastard company laid him off. Always wondered what happened to Tommy's family." I pressed my ear to the ground, not caring how crazy it looked. "Mr. Sullivan? My dad, he died 5 years ago. Lung disease." There was a long pause. Then, "I'm sorry to hear that, boy. Tommy was a good man. Stood up for his fellow workers, which is more than most would do. Mr. Sullivan, what happened down there? What really happened in 1952? "Same thing that always happens when working men ask for a fair shake. Company decided we were more trouble than we were worth. Blew us up and sealed us in. But they made one mistake." "What's that?" "They thought death would break our union. Instead, it just made us stronger." The ground underneath me started to vibrate. At first I thought it was an earthquake. Then I realized it was the sound of men marching. Dozens of heavy boots walking in unison through tunnels that should have been collapsed for decades. "We've been waiting, Joseph," Bill Sullivan's voice continued. "Waiting for someone who understands what it means to stand with working people. Your daddy raised you right, didn't he? He taught me to stick up for people who can't stick up for themselves. Then you'll understand why we can't let you leave. Not yet." The sealed entrances began to crack. Not breaking open exactly, but developing thin lines that glowed with a soft, warm light. Through those cracks came the sound of a full shift of miners. Men talking, tools clan, Jing, the rumble of coal cars on tracks. And then I saw them. They came through the concrete like it was made of water. 47 men in mining clothes, their faces and hands black with coal dust, carrying pickaxes and shovels and lunch pails. They looked exactly like the old photographs I'd seen of my dad and his crew, except for their eyes. Their eyes glowed with the same soft light that came through the cracks in the concrete. At the front of the group walked a man I recognized from my dad's stories, Bill Sullivan, the union organizer who'd tried to protect the miners from company violence. In life, he'd been a small man with a big voice. In death, he seemed to fill the entire valley. "We've got work to do, Joseph," he said, his voice echoing off the mountains. "Same work we've been doing for 26 years. Digging coal to keep the world running, trying to make an honest living in a dishonest business. But you're dead." Bill smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Death don't end a man's responsibilities, son. We got families to feed, bills to pay, and a company that still owes us justice." Behind him, the other miners nodded in agreement. I could see Dr. Kim and Marcus among them now, their skin pale and their eyes glowing with that same eerie light. They looked peaceful, like they'd finally found where they belonged. "Your friends volunteered to help with the paperwork," Bill explained. "Smart fellows, both of them. We need good records if we're ever going to prove what the company did to us." "What do you want from me?" "Same thing we wanted from them. Help us do our job right. Help us make sure no other working men die for some rich man's profits." The other miners stepped closer, forming a circle around me. Up close, I could see the terrible injuries that had killed them. Crushed bones, burned flesh, lungs full of coal dust. But they smiled at me like old friends, and I heard my dad's voice whispering in my memory. "Always stand with your union brothers, Joey. They're the only ones who'll stand with you when time is get hard." "What happens if I say no?" Bill's expression hardened. "Then you walk away and pretend you never saw us. Just like the company did. Just like the government did. Just like everyone else who could have helped but chose not to." I looked at the faces around me. Men who'd died trying to make a better life for their families, who'd been murdered for demanding basic safety and fair wages. Men like my dad, who'd spent their lives underground so people they'd never meet could have heat and electricity. "And if I say yes?" "Then you help us finish what we started. Help us prove that the Blackstone mine explosion was murder, not an accident. Help us make sure the men responsible face justice, even if they have to follow us underground to get it." The wind howled through the valley and snow began to fall harder. In the distance, I could hear vehicles approaching, the backup I'd called for finally making it through the storm. In a few minutes, this place would be crawling with cops and federal agents who would seal off the mine and bury the truth forever. Bill held out his hand to me. "What's it going to be, Joseph Kowalski? You going to stand with us or walk away like everyone else?" I stared at Bill Sullivan's outstretched hand. His skin looked solid, but I could see starlight through his fingers. Behind him, 46 other dead miners waited for my answer, their glowing eyes reflecting decades of hope and anger. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder. Maybe 10 minutes before the authorities arrived and everything got complicated. I had to make a choice that would affect not just me, but everyone who'd ever worked in a mine, everyone who'd ever been crushed by corporate greed. "If I help you," I said, "what exactly are we doing?" "Setting the record straight," Bill replied. "Making sure the world knows what really happened here, and making sure it doesn't happen again. The people who killed you are probably dead by now. It's been 26 years. Bill's smile was cold as winter wind. "Some of them are still alive. Frank Morrison, the supervisor who wrote that letter about dealing with union troublemakers. He's been getting rich off mining consultant contracts ever since. Lives in a mansion in Charleston, sleeps like a baby every night." "And his grandson," said another miner, stepping forward. "Works for the State Mining Commission now. Been covering up safety violations just like Granddaddy taught him." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "How do you know all this?" "We've been watching, Joseph, waiting for the right time to act. Every mine disaster, every cover-up, Every worker who dies because safety costs too much. We see it all, and we remember. Dr. Kim stepped out of the crowd of miners, his face pale but his eyes burning with that ghostly light. "The evidence is all here," he said, holding up a briefcase I hadn't seen him carrying. Company documents, witness statements, proof of the murder, all perfectly preserved underground, waiting for someone to bring it to light. "Bob, what happened to you down there?" "I learned the truth," he said simply. "And once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. You can't walk away and pretend everything is fine." The vehicles were closer now. I could make out headlights cutting through the snow. Maybe 5 minutes left. "What do you need me to do?" Bill's expression softened. "Simple. Take the evidence to the newspapers, the FBI, anyone who'll listen. Tell them what you've seen here. And when the mining companies try to silence you, we'll be there," finished another miner. "All of us. Every worker who ever died for corporate profits. We'll stand behind you." "But there's a cost," Bill continued. "Once you take up this fight, you can't put it down. The mine will call to you the way it called to your friends here. You'll hear us singing when the wind blows, see us working when you close your eyes. Part of you will always belong to us." I thought about my dad, dying slowly from lung disease because the company wouldn't pay for proper ventilation. I thought about Dr. Kim and Marcus, who'd only wanted to help and got pulled into something bigger than they could understand. I thought about 47 men who'd died trying to make things better for their families. And if the evidence isn't enough? If people still don't believe? Bill's grin was sharp as a pickaxe. "Then we expand our operation. Every mine in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, anywhere working folks have died for rich men's profits. We wake them all up, get them organized, show the world what happens when you murder union men." The idea sent ice through my veins. Hundreds of dead miners, maybe thousands, all rising from collapsed tunnels and sealed shafts, all demanding the justice they'd been denied in life. That's not possible, isn't it? Bill gestured to the cracked concrete entrances, where warm light still glowed despite the February cold. "We've been keeping this mine running for 26 years, Joseph. Digging coal, maintaining equipment, following safety protocols the company never bothered with. If we can do that, what makes you think we can't do more?" Marcus stepped forward, still looking like the young graduate student he'd been, except for those glowing eyes. "The underground network connects everything," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through tunnels. "Every mine, every shaft, every tunnel where men have died. It's all connected, and we know the way through all of it." Car doors slammed in the distance, voices calling out, getting organized. The authorities had arrived. "Time's up, Joseph," Bill said. "You in or you out?" I looked at the faces around me. Men who'd died for trying to make the world a little bit fairer, a little bit safer for working people. Men like my dad, who'd spent their lives underground so others could live in the light. I reached out and took Bill Sullivan's hand. His skin felt like coal dust and starlight, cold and warm at the same time. The moment our hands touched, I felt the weight of the mountain above us, the depth of the tunnels below, and the presence of every man who'd ever died in a mine accident. Their voices joined the eternal chorus, singing songs of solidarity and sorrow. "Welcome to the Union, brother," Bill said. The briefcase appeared in my other hand, heavy with documents and evidence, warm with the touch of dead fingers that had preserved it for decades. In the distance, flashlight beams swept through the snow, searching for survivors of whatever had happened at the Blackstone mine. "Go," Bill said. "Tell our story, and when you need us." "We'll be there," the miners said in unison, their voices echoing off the mountains and down through the valleys where other sealed mines waited in darkness. I ran toward the approaching lights, the briefcase clutched against my chest like a newborn baby. Behind me, the miners faded back into the mountain, but I could still hear them singing. I would always hear them singing. That was 6 months ago. The briefcase Bill Sullivan gave me contained enough evidence to blow the mining industry wide open. Company documents detailing deliberate safety violations, witness statements from miners who'd tried to report dangerous conditions, and most damning of all, Frank Morrison's letter admitting to the murders. The FBI investigation led to the arrest of 12 people, including Morrison's grandson, at the State Mining Commission. The families of the 47 dead miners finally got justice, and more importantly, they got the truth. The Blackstone mine is now a memorial site with each victim's name carved in granite along with the words, "Union Strong Forever." But that's not the end of the story. 3 weeks after the arrests, I got a call from a ranger in Pennsylvania. Voices singing underground at an abandoned mine near Pittsburgh. 2 weeks after that, Kentucky reported the same thing. Then Tennessee, Virginia, Ohio. Wherever men had died in mining accidents, the dead were waking up. I've been traveling from site to site, carrying evidence briefcases that appear overnight in my truck, filled with documents that should have been destroyed decades ago. Each mine has its own story of corporate greed and worker sacrifice, its own chorus of the dead demanding justice. The mining companies are scared now. They're settling lawsuits, improving safety standards, paying out claims they've fought for years. Because they know what I know. The dead are watching, and they have very long memories. I still work as a forest ranger, but my real job is different now. I'm a translator between the living and the dead, a messenger carrying stories that need to be told. And every night when I go to sleep, I hear them singing. Not just the miners from Blackstone, but all of them. Every man who ever died underground, their voices joined in an eternal chorus of solidarity and hope. Dr. Kim and Marcus, they're still down there, keeping the records, making sure nothing gets forgotten or covered up. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in my peripheral vision, standing at the edges of other mine sites, watching to make sure I tell the story right. My dad visits me too, in dreams where he's young again and wearing a hard hat with a headlamp. He tells me he's proud, that I'm doing the work he always wished he could have done. "Keep fighting, Joey," he says, "for all of us." The mine companies have put a price on my head. They want me discredited, silenced, maybe worse. But they don't understand what they're dealing with. I'm not just one man with a briefcase anymore. I'm backed by every worker who ever died for someone else's profit, and that's an army they can't buy or intimidate. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice that night, out in the snow. If I should have just walked away and let the dead stay buried. But then I think about the families who finally got answers, the miners who are working safer jobs because of improved regulations, and the voices that can finally rest because their stories have been told. The Blackstone Mine chorus still sings, but it's not a song of sorrow anymore. It's a song of victory, of justice served, and wrongs made right. And when other mines need their help, when other dead workers need someone to speak for them, those voices carry across the underground networks that connect every shaft and tunnel where men have labored and died. The Union is stronger in death than it ever was in life, and I'm honored to be their representative among the living. Sometimes late at night, when the wind blows just right, I can hear them all singing together. Thousands of voices from hundreds of mines, all raised in harmony. It's the most beautiful and terrifying sound in the world, and it reminds me that some fights are worth dying for. But more importantly, it reminds me that some fights are worth living for too. The coal mine chorus will keep singing until every wrong is made right, until every worker who died for corporate greed gets the justice they deserve. And as long as they need someone to carry their message to the world above, I'll be there, briefcase in hand, and their songs echoing in my ears. Union strong forever. My name is Margaret O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal hunters, meth labs hidden in caves. You name it, I've dealt with it. What I hadn't dealt with was anything like what happened at Salvation Hollow. I used to be a nun. People are always surprised when I tell them that. They look at my ranger uniform, my muddy boots, the way I can curse like a sailor when I stub my toe on a rock, and they can't picture me in a habit. Truth is, I left the convent 12 years ago after what the church calls a crisis of faith. What I call it is finally waking up to reality. I'd seen enough real evil in people, abuse, corruption, cruelty done in God's name, that I didn't need to invent monsters in the woods to explain the darkness in this world. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. Dr. Sarah Chen from the university had been running an archaeological dig at an old church site up in Salvation Hollow. The place was a leftover from the 1800s, back when settlers thought they could carve out a piece of heaven in these mountains. The whole settlement had vanished in 1847, just disappeared overnight during some kind of religious revival. Only the church remained, though the bell tower had collapsed back in the 1920s. Dr. Chen's team had permits to excavate the site, looking for artifacts and trying to piece together what happened to those long-dead settlers. But their permits had expired 10 days ago, and nobody had heard from them since. No radio contact, no supply requests, nothing. That wasn't like Chen. She was thorough, always followed procedure. The fog had been strange that September. It rolled into the valleys and just sat there for weeks, thick as cotton and twice as stubborn. It made everything feel muffled and wrong, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Even the animals seemed on edge. I'd found deer tracks running in perfect circles as if they'd been spooked by something but couldn't figure out which way to run. I loaded my truck with supplies and headed up the old logging road toward Salvation Hollow. The road had been washed out in places by recent storms, making the 15-mile drive from town feel like 50. The deeper I got into the mountains, the thicker the fog became. By the time I reached the hollow, I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. That's when I heard it for the first time. Singing. Hymn singing, coming from somewhere in the fog ahead of me. The voices were distant but clear, harmonizing in a way that made my skin crawl. It reminded me of the old hymns we used to sing in the convent, but there was something off about it. Something that made my chest feel tight. I parked the truck and grabbed my radio, trying to raise the archaeological team. Nothing but static answered me back. The singing continued, seeming to come from all directions at once. I'd been in these woods thousands of times, but I'd never heard anything like it. Wildlife didn't sing hymns, and there weren't supposed to be any people up here except Chen's team. I followed the sound through the fog, my flashlight cutting a weak path through the gray. The trees looked wrong somehow, their branches reaching toward the invisible church like they were trying to pray. When I finally saw the building emerge from the mist, I stopped dead in my tracks. The Church of Salvation Hollow looked exactly like it had in the old photographs I'd seen. White clapboard walls, tall windows, a peaked roof. But it shouldn't have looked that good. This building had been abandoned for over a century. It should have been rotting, falling apart, claimed by the forest. Instead, it looked like someone had just finished building it yesterday. The singing was coming from inside. I approached the church carefully, my hand resting on the radio, clipped to my belt. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. The air was too still, too quiet except for those voices. My compass spun wildly when I checked it, the needle dancing like it couldn't find north. Even my flashlight seemed dimmer here, the beam barely reaching the church's front door. The archaeological site was a mess. Equipment scattered everywhere like the team had left in a hurry. Laptop computers still open with dead batteries, coffee cups half empty, sandwiches with just one bite taken. Dr. Chen's field notes were spread across a folding table, the pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. I picked up the notebook and flipped through it. Chen's handwriting was usually neat, but the last few entries looked shaky, rushed. Day 8. Found something under the altar. Stone foundation much older than expected. Team reporting strange dreams. The next page. Day 9. Kevin says he can hear the original congregation still singing. Lisa found fresh flowers on graves that should be 150 years old. The final entry made my blood run cold. Day 10. Father Torres arrived this morning. Says he's here to help with the spiritual aspects of the site. But I didn't call any priest, and he knew about the singing before I told him. Father Torres. I knew that name. Father Michael Torres had been the priest who helped me transition out of religious life, who'd listened to my doubts without judgment and helped me find my path as a ranger. But what was he doing here? And why hadn't Chen called for him? The singing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the hymns had been. It pressed against my eardrums like water, making me dizzy. I called out, "Hello, Dr. Chen? Anyone there?" My voice sounded small and wrong in the sudden quiet. That's when I noticed the bell. There was no bell tower. It had collapsed decades ago, but I could see a bronze bell hanging in midair above the church, suspended by nothing. As I watched, it swung once, twice, and rang out clear and loud across the hollow. The sound seemed to echo forever. I tried my radio again. Still nothing but static, though for a moment I thought I heard something else underneath the white noise. A voice, distant and scratchy, speaking in old-fashioned English about gathering the flock and eternal worship. I turned the radio off and clipped it back to my belt. The church door stood slightly open. Through the gap, I could see candlelight flickering inside. Someone was definitely in there, but the way the light moved didn't look right. It danced and swayed like the flames were alive, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior took my breath away. The church was beautiful. Polished wooden pews, stained glass windows that somehow caught light despite the fog outside. An ornate altar decorated with fresh flowers. It looked like it had been maintained by loving hands for all these years, not abandoned to rot. But it was the people that really stopped me cold. There were maybe 30 of them sitting in the pews, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes from the 1800s. Long dresses for the women, dark suits for the men, children in their Sunday best. They sat perfectly still, facing the altar where a tall figure in preacher's robes stood with his back to me. The preacher's face was hidden in the shadow of his hood, but his voice carried clearly as he spoke about salvation and eternal service. I blinked hard, thinking the fog had gotten to me. But when I opened my eyes, they were still there, still sitting in perfect rows, not moving, not breathing. And I realized with a chill that I could see right through them to the wooden pews beneath. The preacher turned toward me, and where his face should have been was only darkness. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome, Sister Margaret. We've been waiting for you to return to the fold." I stumbled backward toward the door, but it had somehow closed behind me. The ghostly congregation turned as one to look at me, their pale faces serene and terrifying. In the front pew, I saw Dr. Chen sitting perfectly still, her eyes closed and a peaceful smile on her lips. Next to her sat a young woman I recognized from the university photos, Lisa Park, one of the graduate students. They weren't moving, they weren't breathing, but they were somehow still there. The preacher raised his hand, and when he did, I felt an overwhelming urge to walk forward and take my place in the pews, to join the eternal service, to never leave. I fought against the compulsion, pressing my back against the door. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This can't be real." The preacher's laugh echoed through the church like wind through a graveyard. "Reality is what we make it, sister, and this congregation has been making its own reality for a very long time." That's when I noticed Father Torres. He sat in the third pew wearing his black priest's collar, his familiar face turned toward the altar in rapture. When I called his name, he didn't respond. He just sat there like all the others, part of the eternal service. The bell rang again, and the congregation began to sing. The same hymn I'd heard outside, but now I was close enough to see that their mouths weren't moving. The sound came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. It wrapped around me like chains, pulling me toward an empty space in the front pew. I finally managed to grab the door handle and stumble outside into the fog. Behind me, the singing continued, but now it sounded like laughter. I made it back to my truck on shaking legs, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. Ghosts weren't supposed to exist. I'd left religion behind precisely because I couldn't believe in things that couldn't be proven. But I'd seen Dr. Chen in that pew, and she'd been missing for 10 days. I tried the RA. Dio again, this time getting through to the ranger station. Base, this is Maggie. I need backup at Salvation Hollow. We have missing persons and complications. The response crackled through static. Copy, Maggie. What kind of complications? How do you explain a church full of ghosts to someone sitting in a normal office 40 miles away? Just send someone and call the county coroner. We're going to need him. While I waited for backup, I searched the archaeological campsite more thoroughly. In Dr. Chen's tent, I found her laptop still running on battery backup. The last video log entry was dated 3 days ago. When I played it, Chen appeared on screen, looking exhausted and frightened. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, day 13 of the Salvation Hollow excavation, she began, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I need to report some unusual findings. We discovered a chamber beneath the church altar containing documents and artifacts that predate the official settlement by at least 50 years. The papers describe a preacher named Ezekiel Thorne, who made some kind of pact to ensure his congregation would worship forever. She paused as singing could be heard in the background. The team has been experiencing shared hallucinations. We all see the same figures, hear the same voices. Kevin thinks we're being exposed to some kind of gas leak from underground, but our air quality tests come back normal. Lisa started attending the services 3 nights ago. She just sits in the church all night, claiming she's part of the congregation now. The video cut to static for a moment, then resumed with Chen looking directly into the camera. If something happens to us, if we don't make it out, someone needs to know. This place is wrong. The preacher we found in the documents, Ezekiel Thorne, I think he's still here, still preaching to his flock. And I think he went ants to add us to his congregation. The recording ended there. I was still staring at the blank screen when I heard footsteps approaching through the fog. Relief flooded through me until I realized the steps were too measured, too rhythmic, like someone walking to the beat of a slow hymn. Kevin Murphy, the archaeological team's lead excavator, emerged from the mist. He was dressed in a dark suit that looked like it belonged in a museum, walking with the same serene expression I'd seen on the faces in the church. His skin had a waxy, pale quality that made my skin crawl. "Hello, Maggie," he said in a voice that didn't sound quite like his own. "Brother Ezekiel would like to speak with you. He has a message about your calling." I backed toward my truck, but Kevin moved to block my path. Up close, I could see that his eyes were completely black, reflecting the fog like dark mirrors. "You left God's service once, Sister Margaret," Kevin continued, "but God is merciful. He's offering you a chance to return, to serve forever in perfect faith, without doubt, without question." "Kevin, this isn't you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever's happened here, we can get help. We can..." "Help?" Kevin tilted his head like a curious bird. "We are beyond help. We are beyond doubt. We have found perfect peace in eternal worship." He took another step forward, and I could smell something wrong about him. Not decay, but something like old flowers and stagnant water. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth were too white, too perfect. Dr. Chen tried to resist too. She fought for 3 days before she accepted her place in the congregation. But fighting only makes it harder. Why struggle against paradise? I fumbled for my truck keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Kevin watched with patient amusement like he had all the time in the world. Maybe he did. "The others are waiting for you in the church," he said. "Lisa, Father Torres, Dr. Chen, they're all so happy now, so at peace. Don't you want to feel that peace again? Don't you miss the Serta into your faith?" I got the truck door open and dove inside, slamming the locks just as Kevin reached for the handle. He pressed his pale face against the window, his black eyes boring into mine. "You can't leave, Sister Margaret. Not until you've heard Brother Ezekiel's full sermon. Not until you've taken your place with the flock." I started the engine and threw the truck in reverse, but Kevin didn't move away from the window. Instead, he seemed to fade, becoming translucent like the congregation in the church. My truck drove right through him, and in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing unchanged in the road, watching me go. But I didn't get far. A mile down the logging road, I found another member of the archaeological team standing in my path. Lisa Park, the graduate student from the video. She wore a long white dress that looked like it had been styled in the 1800s, and her face had the same peaceful, terrifying expression as Kevin's. I tried to drive around her, but she moved to block me again, this time joined by two other figures I didn't recognize, a man and woman in period dress who had to be from the original 1847 congregation. They stood hand in hand, smiling at me with black eyes. The radio crackled to life without me touching it. A voice I now recognized as Brother Ezekiel Thorne filled the truck cab. "You cannot flee from salvation, Margaret O'Sullivan. You cannot run from your calling. The road leads only back to the church, back to the eternal service, back to me." I looked ahead and behind. The fog had grown thicker, and now I could see more figures emerging from the gray. Dozens of them, all in old-fashioned clothes, all walking slowly but purposefully toward my truck. The entire ghostly congregation was coming for me, and somewhere in the distance, that bell kept ringing, counting down to something I didn't want to imagine. I abandoned the truck and ran into the forest, crashing through underbrush as the fog closed in around me. Behind me, I could hear the measured footsteps of the congregation, never hurrying, but never stopping. Their hymn singing followed me through the trees, seeming to come from every direction at once. The woods felt different now, wrong in ways that made my head spin. Trees grew in perfect straight lines like church pews. Wildflowers bloomed in geometric patterns that spelled out words and languages I didn't recognize. And no matter which way I ran, I kept finding myself back at the church. On my fourth attempt to escape, I gave up and approached the building directly. If I was trapped here, I needed to understand what I was facing. The front door stood open like a mouth, candlelight spilling out onto the fog-covered ground. This time, I was ready for what I'd find inside. Brother Ezekiel Thorne stood at the altar, no longer trying to hide his face. What looked back at me wasn't human. It was tall and skeletal, with skin like old parchment and eyes that burned with cold fire. His preacher's robes hung on a frame that seemed too thin to support them, and when he smiled, his teeth were black as tar. "Welcome home, Sister Margaret," he said, and his voice echoed through dimensions I couldn't name. "I've been waiting so long for your return." The congregation filled every pew, and now I could see them clearly. The original settlers from 1847 sat alongside more recent additions. Hikers who'd gotten lost over the years, researchers who'd come to investigate, even other park rangers who'd vanished without explanation. All of them wore the same expression of peaceful devotion. Dr. Chen sat in the front row, her hands folded in prayer. When I called her name, she looked at me with those terrible black eyes and smiled. "Don't fight it, Maggie," she said in a voice like rustling leaves. "It's so much easier when you stop fighting, so much more peaceful." Father Torres was there too, still wearing his priest's collar, but his face was pale and waxy like all the others. "I tried to help them," he said when he saw me looking. "I came here to perform an exorcism, to free the souls trapped in this place. But Brother Ezekiel showed me the truth. This isn't a prison, it's paradise. Eternal worship without doubt, without questioning, without the burden of free will." "Precisely," Brother Ezekiel said, stepping down from the altar. "I have given these souls what they truly wanted. Perfect faith, unending service, eternal peace. No more struggles with doubt, no more wrestling with uncertainty. They worship, and in their worship, they find perfect happiness." I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The windows went dark, cutting off any light from outside. The only illumination came from the candles that burned with cold, blue flames. "You were chosen for this, Sister Margaret," the preacher continued, moving closer with each word. "Your years of service in the convent, your training in faith and devotion, you're perfectly prepared to be my assistant in this holy work. Together we'll gather more souls for the eternal congregation." "This isn't holy," I said, finding my voice at last. "This is slavery. You've trapped these people, stolen their free will." Brother Ezekiel laughed, and the sound made the church walls shake. "Free will? What good is free will when it leads only to doubt and suffering? I have freed them from choice, from uncertainty, from the burden of having to decide whether to believe. Now they simply worship, forever and ever. in perfect bliss. He raised his hand, and I felt that same compulsion I'd experienced before, the overwhelming urge to walk forward, to take my place among the congregation, to stop fighting and just give in to the peace he offered. But as I fought against the mental pressure, I realized something important. The preacher's power worked through religious conditioning, through the part of me too. Had once been a nun that had been trained to obey and serve, but I'd broken free from that conditioning once before. "I don't serve your kind of God anymore," I said, straightening up. "I learned something when I left the convent. Real faith doesn't require surrender of the mind. Real love doesn't demand slavery." Brother Ezekiel's expression darkened. "You think your weak human love is stronger than my divine service? You think your pathetic rebellion can break bonds that have held for over a century?" "Not rebellion," I said, walking toward the altar despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "Love, self-sacrifice, the same things that drove me to become a nun in the first place, and the same things that gave me the strength to leave when the church became corrupt." I could feel the congregation stirring behind me, their perfect peace disrupted by my words. Dr. Chen looked confused, like she was trying to remember something important. Father Torres's black eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition. "I offer myself," I said loudly, addressing the preacher directly. "Take me as your assistant, your second in command, whatever you want. But release the others. Let them go to whatever peace awaits them naturally." Brother Ezekiel paused, considering. "You would trade your soul for theirs?" "Yes. Even though they chose to be here? Even though they found happiness in eternal service?" I looked at Dr. Chen, at Father Torres, at all the faces turned toward me. Under the peaceful expressions, I could see something else, a flicker of awareness, of trapped humanity crying out for release. "They didn't choose," I said. "You took their choice away. But I'm offering mine freely." The preacher smiled, revealing those black teeth. "Very well. One willing soul is worth a dozen taken by force. Accept your place as my eternal assistant, and I'll release the others to whatever fate awaits them." I walked to the altar, each step feeling like I was walking underwater. Behind me, I could hear the congregation stirring, murmuring, as if waking for a long dream. "Do you, Margaret O'Sullivan, accept eternal service in my holy work?" I looked at the faces of the trapped souls one more time, then back at the creature wearing preacher's robes. "I accept." The words hit the church like lightning. The moment I spoke those words, everything changed. Brother Ezekiel Thorne threw back his head and laughed in triumph, but his laughter cut short as golden light began to fill the church. Not the cold blue of his candles, but warm, genuine light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The congregation gasped as one, their black eyes clearing to show their natural colors. Dr. Chen looked around in confusion, then terror, as she realized where she was. Father Torres crossed himself and began praying in Latin, his voice shaking but determined. "What have you done?" Brother Ezekiel snarled, his form beginning to waver like heat shimmer. I felt the answer in my heart, finally understanding what was happening. "I gave myself freely, out of love for others." That's the one thing you can't corrupt or control. Genuine self-sacrifice breaks your power because it comes from true faith, not the kind that demands blind obedience, but the kind that chooses love over fear. The preacher's form was dissolving now, his century-old binding to this place unraveling. "You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. I have served the darkness since before your country was born." "And now your service is ended," I said, feeling strength I didn't know I possessed flowing through me. The golden light grew brighter, and one by one, the members of the congregation began to fade, not into nothingness, but into something that looked like peace, real peace. Dr. Chen caught my hand as she began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can see them now. My parents, my grandmother. They're waiting for me." Father Torres paused beside me as his form became translucent. "You found your faith again, didn't you, Maggie? Not the kind they teach in seminaries, But the real thing, I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I found it in service to others, not service to power. One by one, they faded into that golden light, finally free to continue their journey to whatever came next. The original 1847 congregation went too. Their century-plus imprisonment finally ended. Even the recent victims, Kevin, Lisa, the other researchers, were released from their ghostly bondage. Brother Ezekiel Thorne was the last to go, his form unraveling like smoke in the wind. "This isn't over," he hissed. "There are other churches, other congregations. The darkness has many servants. And the light has many guardians," I replied. He screamed once, then dissolved completely, leaving only the echo of his voice fading into nothing. The church building began to collapse around me, its supernatural preservation finally failing. I ran for the door as the roof caved in and the walls crumbled. Behind me, a century and a half of accumulated wrongness was finally being set right. I made it outside just as the entire structure fell in on itself, raising a cloud of dust and debris that mixed with the fog. When the dust settled, nothing remained but a foundation of old stones and the memory of what had happened here. My truck started on the first try, and the fog lifted as I drove back down the mountain. By the time the backup rangers arrived at my radio call, there was nothing to see but archaeological equipment scattered around an empty ruin. The official report listed it as a structural collapse that caught the research team inside. Tragic, but not unusual for old buildings in the mountains. I never told anyone the real story. Who would believe it? But I kept Dr. Chen's research notes, and I started my own investigation into similar disappearances throughout the Appalachian region. Turns out Salvation Hollow wasn't unique. There are other places, other churches, other servants of the darkness still operating. I'm still a park ranger, but now I have a different mission. I watch for the signs, unexplained disappearances, reports of phantom singing, churches that look too well preserved for their age. When I find them, I do what needs to be done. Last month, I got reports of hymn singing coming from an abandoned church in West Virginia. The local rangers found a historical research team that had gone missing 2 weeks earlier. Their equipment was scattered just like it had been at Salvation Hollow. I'm driving up there tomorrow morning. Some people might say I'm crazy, chasing ghost stories through the mountains. Maybe they're right. But I know what I've seen, and I know what I've done. I found my faith again in that church. Not faith in institutions or doctrines, but faith in the power of love to overcome darkness. And sometimes, that's enough to set the trapped souls free. The mountains are full of old churches, old secrets, old hungers that feed on faith turned to fanaticism. But they're also full of people like me. People who've learned that real faith means standing up to the darkness, not surrendering to it. Brother Ezekiel was right about one thing. This isn't over. But he was wrong about who was going to win. I've got work to do. My name is Danny McReynolds, and I've been a park ranger in the George Washington National Forest for 13 years now. Before that, I taught high school geology for 6 years until I got tired of kids throwing paper airplanes when I talked about rock formations. Out here in the mountains of Virginia, the rocks don't throw anything back at you. At least that's what I used to think. I'm 39 years old, built like most folks from these parts. Not too tall, but solid enough to carry a heavy pack up a steep trail. My grandfather came over from Ireland, and my grandmother was Cherokee. She used to tell stories about mountains that could think and stones that remembered everything. I always figured those were just old tales to scare children into staying close to home. Thunder Mountain sits about 20 miles from the nearest paved road, deep in the forest where cell phones don't work, and the only sounds you hear are wind, water, and whatever's moving through the trees. It's a beautiful place, covered in old-growth pines and oaks, with streams that run crystal clear and deer that'll let you get close enough to count their spots. But Thunder Mountain has always been different from the other peaks around here. The Cherokee called it the place where stones speak, and even the old copper miners from the 1800s had stories about hearing music coming from inside the rocks. I'd always figured it was just wind blowing through limestone caves. Wind can make some pretty strange noises when it hits rock the right way. That morning in late August, I got a radio call from headquarters that changed everything. A geological survey team had gone missing up on Thunder Mountain. They'd been there for 6 days studying some old copper deposits for a mining company. Their last radio check-in was 3 days ago, and their families were starting to worry. The team leader was Dr. Pat Paz, Risha Vance, and hearing her name made my chest tight. We'd worked together years ago when I was still teaching. Patricia was the kind of woman who could look at a chunk of rock and tell you exactly how old it was and what the weather was like when it formed. She was also the kind of woman who'd made me think about giving up teaching and finding a job where I might see her more often. I loaded my backpack with emergency supplies, checked my radio twice, and headed up the old mining trail toward Thunder Mountain. The weather had been rough lately, lots of thunderstorms that seemed to hit the mountain more than anywhere else. Lightning had knocked out 2 communication towers, which explained why the survey team's radio had gone quiet. As I hiked up the trail, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. The birds had gone quiet, and I hadn't seen any deer sign for the last 2 miles. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. The air felt heavy, like it does right before a big storm, but the sky was clear. Then I heard it, a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was so deep I felt it in my bones more than heard it with my ears. It reminded me of the way a big church organ sounds when someone plays the lowest notes, but quieter and somehow more alive. I stopped walking and listened hard. The sound would fade away for a minute, then come back stronger. It wasn't wind. I'd heard wind through caves and canyons hundreds of times, and this was something else entirely. This sounded almost like singing. My head started to ache, a dull throbbing that seemed to match the rhythm of the humming. I took 2 aspirin from my first aid kit and kept walking. But the closer I got to Thunder Mountain, the worse the headache became. By the time I could see the survey camp through the trees, I felt like someone was driving nails into my skull. Hell, the survey camp looked like someone had left in a hurry, but not the way you'd expect if there was real danger. The tents were still standing and properly staked down. Expensive equipment. Seismic readers, core sample containers, laptop computers, sat out in the open like the team had just stepped away for lunch. But their lunch was still on the camp table, sandwiches half-eaten and already growing mold. Coffee cups sat full of green scum. Flies buzzed around plates of food that had been sitting there for days. I called out, "Patricia, Dr. Vance." My voice echoed off the mountain face, but nobody answered. The humming sound got a little louder, and I noticed that it seemed to be coming from the rocks themselves. I found Patricia's notebook lying open next to a piece of copper ore. Her last entry was dated 3 days ago. Mineral formations showing unusual acoustic properties. Samples produce musical tones when struck. Need to investigate further. The rocks are responding to each other like some kind of natural orchestra. That didn't make sense. Rocks don't make music. They make noise when you hit them, sure, but not music. I picked up a small piece of the copper ore and tapped it with my knife handle. Instead of the dull thunk I expected, it rang like a bell, a pure, sweet note that hung in the air for almost 10 seconds. I tried another piece. This one made a different note, lower and richer. When I tapped both pieces at the same time, they seemed to harmonize with each other, creating a sound that was actually pretty beautiful. "What the hell?" I said out loud, and immediately wished I hadn't. The mountain seemed to catch my words and throw them back at me from a dozen different directions, each echo slightly different, like a chorus of voices all saying, "What the hell?" in slightly different tones. I grabbed the radio and tried to call headquarters. Static filled the speaker, but underneath the crackling, I could hear something that sounded almost like voices singing. I adjusted the frequency, but it didn't help. Every channel was full of the same weird music. That's when I noticed the seismic equipment was still running. The paper readout showed continuous activity, little earthquake tremors happening every few seconds, like the mountain was breathing. But that was impossible. You don't get regular seismic activity like that unless there's something artificial causing it. I followed the equipment cables to where they disappeared into a crack in the rock face. The crack wasn't very wide, but it went deep into the mountain. When I put my ear close to it, the humming sound got much louder. It definitely seemed to be coming from inside the mountain. I got my flashlight and shined it into the crack. About 10 feet down, the narrow passage opened up into what looked like a natural cave chamber. I could see some of the survey team's equipment down there. More cables, a sample container, what looked like someone's backpack. The smart thing would have been to go back and get help, call in a search and rescue team with proper caving equipment. But I kept thinking about Patricia down there, maybe hurt, maybe trapped, waiting for someone to find her. I squeezed through the crack. It was tight, and I had to take my backpack off and push it ahead of me, but I made it through. The chamber on the other side was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 30 feet across and 15 feet high. The walls were lined with copper veins that seemed to glow in my flashlight beam. That's where I found Dr. Robert Kim. He was standing against the far wall of the chamber, but something was very wrong with the picture. Kim was perfectly upright, his eyes open, his mouth slightly open like he'd been in the middle of saying something, but he wasn't moving, he wasn't breathing, and he was partially embedded in the solid rock wall. From his chest down, his body disappeared into the stone like he'd been pressed into soft clay that had then hardened and around him. But the rock showed no cracks, no signs that it had ever been disturbed. It looked like he'd always been part of the wall. I reached out to touch his face, and his skin felt cold as marble. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't respond when I said his name, but somehow I could tell he was still alive. Don't ask me how I knew. There was just something about him that wasn't quite dead. The humming sound was much louder in the chamber, and now I could tell it was definitely coming from the copper veins in the walls. When I touched one of the veins with my finger, it vibrated like a guitar string, sending a musical note echoing through the chamber. The note seemed to wake something up. The humming got louder, more complex. I started to hear what sounded like different voices joining in, some high, some low, some that seemed to match the note I'd just made. That's when I noticed Dr. Kim's lips were moving, just slightly. No sound was coming out, but he was trying to say something. I leaned closer and barely heard him whisper, "Get out, while you still can." I backed away from Kim so fast I tripped over my own feet. The flashlight slipped from my hands and rolled across the cave floor, sending crazy shadows dancing on the walls. In the jumping light, I could see other shapes embedded in the rock, shapes that looked human. The humming turned into something that sounded more like singing now. Voices joined in from different parts of the chamber, some deep like men's voices, some higher like women or children. The melody was strange and beautiful, but it made my skin crawl. I grabbed my flashlight and ran for the crack that led back outside. But when I got there, the opening was smaller, a lot smaller. I could barely get my head through, let alone my whole body. "No, no, no," I said, pushing against the rock walls. But they felt solid as concrete. Either I was losing my mind, or the mountain had somehow closed the passage while I was looking at Kim. Behind me, the singing got louder. I turned around and saw something that made my knees go weak. The copper veins in the walls were glowing brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat, and in that pulsing light, I could see at least 6 human figures embedded in the rock around the chamber. Men and women of different ages, all perfectly preserved, all with their eyes open and their lips moving slightly in time with the music. One of them was Sandra Walsh, another member of the survey team. I recognized her red hair and the small scar on her chin from where she'd fallen off her bike as a kid. She'd told me that story last year at a conference in Richmond. Sandra was embedded in the wall up to her waist, but unlike Kim, she was still fighting it. Her hands pressed against the rock, trying to push herself free. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with hope and terror. "Danny," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the singing. "Help me! It's pulling me in!" I ran to her and grabbed her hands, pulling as hard as I could. For a moment I thought I felt her move, like she was coming loose from the rock. But then the stone seemed to grip her tighter, and she sank another inch deeper into the wall. "It's alive," she gasped. "The whole mountain. It's alive. And it's hungry." The singing reached a crescendo, and suddenly the rock passage behind me opened up again, but I could hear footsteps echoing through it, someone else coming down into the chamber. "McReynolds, you down there?" It was a man's voice I didn't recognize. "Down here," I called back. "Bring rope." People are trapped. A minute later, Jake Morrison squeezed through the crack. I'd never met him before, but he was wearing a Consolidated Mining Company jacket and carrying a metal briefcase that looked expensive. He was about 50, built soft like a man who spent most of his time behind a desk. "Jesus Christ," he said when he saw Sandra trapped in the wall. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know." "What are you doing here?" Morrison set down his briefcase and opened it. Inside were instruments I didn't recognize, things that looked like metal detectors crossed with medical equipment. Company's been monitoring unusual geological activity in this area for months. Seismic readings, electromagnetic anomalies, things that don't make sense. He pulled out something that looked like a stethoscope and pressed it against the wall near Sandra. "Holy shit, the rock is warm, and there's definitely some kind of circulation going on inside it." "Circulation?" I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Listen for yourself." I put the stethoscope against the wall. At first all I heard was the singing, but then I picked up something else. A rhythmic thumping that sounded exactly like a heartbeat. A very large, very slow heartbeat. "The mountain's alive," Morrison said, his eyes bright with excitement. "It's some kind of mineral-based life form. Do you have any idea what this could be worth?" "Worth?" I grabbed him by the shoulders. "There are people dying here." "Not dying," he said, pulling away from me. "Look at them. They're being preserved, integrated. The mountain is keeping them alive while it studies them." I looked around the chamber again. He was right. All the people embedded in the walls looked perfectly healthy, just trapped. Their skin had a slight metallic sheen, like their blood was being replaced with something else. But they were definitely alive. "We need to get them out," I said. "We need samples first." Morrison was already pulling tools out of his briefcase. "If we can figure out how this organism works, we can replicate it. Imagine the medical applications. Imagine the mining possibilities." The singing suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete it hurt my ears. Then, very slowly, a new voice joined the chorus, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't human. It was too big, too old, too alien. But somehow I understood what it was trying to say. Hungry, so hungry. Feed me. Bow, ring me more. Morrison was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "It's trying to communicate." The voice came again, clearer this time. "Iron, copper, calcium, phosphorus. You have what I need." That's when I realized what was happening. The mountain wasn't just alive. It was feeding on the minerals in human bodies, the copper in our blood, the calcium in our bones, the iron in our muscles. It was slowly absorbing the survey team, keeping them conscious while it drained them of everything it needed to stay alive. And we'd just walked into its dining room. Morrison was so excited he could barely stand still. He pulled out a device that looked like a combination radio and computer and started speaking into it. "Base, this is Morrison. I'm confirming the anomaly. We have a living geological formation, definitely sentient, definitely capable of communication. Recommend immediate extraction team and full research setup." The mountain's voice rumbled through the chamber again. "More food. Bring more food." "You see," Morrison said to me. "It's asking for more specimens. We can work out a deal, give it what it wants in exchange for samples and research access." "Are you insane?" I grabbed his arm. "It's eating people. It's preserving them. Look at Kim. He's been missing for days, but he's in perfect condition." I looked at Dr. Kim again. Morrison was right. He did look perfectly preserved, but his eyes were moving now, tracking back and forth between Morrison and me. When he looked at me, I could see pure terror in his expression. The copper veins in the walls started pulsing brighter. The other people trapped in the rock, Sandra and 4 others I didn't recognize, all started moving their mouths more frantically, like they were trying to scream but couldn't make any sound. That's when the floor started to change. It began as just a soft spot under Morrison's feet. He stumbled and looked down, and we both saw that the rock was becoming liquid, like thick mud. His boots were starting to sink. "What the hell?" He tried to step back, but the liquid rock followed him. With each step he took, more of the floor turned soft and clingy. The mountain's voice was louder now, almost cheerful. Fresh minerals, iron-rich blood, strong bones. Thank you for the gift. Morrison finally understood what was happening. He dropped his equipment and tried to run for the passage, but the liquid rock was up to his ankles now, hardening around his boots like concrete. "Help me!" he screamed. "Pull me out!" I grabbed his hands and pulled, but it was like trying to pull someone out of quicksand. Every time I got him to move a little, the rock would surge up higher, gripping him tighter. The singing started again, but now I could hear Morrison's voice joining in, even though his mouth wasn't moving. The mountain was already starting to absorb him, to make him part of itself. I let go of his hands and ran to my backpack, looking for anything that might help. I had some climbing rope, but nothing to anchor it to. I had a small axe for cutting firewood, but hitting the rock around Morrison would probably just hurt him. Then I remembered the dynamite. Every ranger in mining country carries a few sticks of dynamite for emergency trail clearing. It's dangerous to carry and dangerous to use, but sometimes you need to move a rock that's too big for anything else. I had 3 sticks in a special case in my pack. If I could blow a hole in the chamber wall, maybe I could disrupt whatever the mountain was doing, at least create enough chaos to get Morrison free. But Morrison was already chest deep in the rock, and his eyes were starting to take on the same metallic sheen I'd seen in the others. When he tried to talk, his voice came out in harmony with the mountain's song. "Don't fight," the mountain's voice was saying. "It doesn't hurt. You'll be part of something greater. You'll live forever." I could see the appeal. The people in the walls didn't look like they were suffering. They looked peaceful, almost happy. And the idea of living forever, even like this, was tempting. But then I thought about Patricia, who was still somewhere in this mountain, probably going through the same thing Morrison was experiencing right now. If I gave up, if I let the mountain take me too, nobody would know what happened here. Nobody would come looking for us. I set the timer on one of the dynamite sticks for 30 seconds and threw it as far as I could toward the back of the chamber. Then I grabbed Morrison under the arms and pulled with everything I had. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Rock fragments flew everywhere, and a huge crack opened up in the back wall of the chamber. But more importantly, the shock seemed to confuse the mountain for a moment. The liquid rock around Morrison suddenly hardened, but it also became brittle. I grabbed my axe and started chopping at the rock around his legs. Big chunks broke away, and after a few swings, I was able to pull him free. He was unconscious, but he was breathing. The mountain's voice rose to an angry roar. "Mine. They are mine." The whole chamber started to shake. More cracks appeared in the walls, and I could hear rushing water somewhere nearby. My explosion had done more damage than I'd intended. It might have broken into an underground stream. I threw Morrison over my shoulder and ran for the passage. It was fully open now, but I could feel the mountain trying to close it again. Rock ground against rock as the opening got narrower. I dove through the crack just as it snapped shut behind us, leaving Morrison's boot heel behind. I dragged Morrison back to the survey camp and used the radio to call for emergency evacuation. The helicopter arrived 2 hours later, just as he was starting to wake up. The medics said he was in shock and severely dehydrated, but otherwise okay. While they were loading him into the helicopter, I told the pilot about the people trapped in the mountain. He promised to send back a full rescue team with proper mining equipment. But when the rescue team arrived the next day, they couldn't find the chamber. The crack in the rock had sealed itself completely. Their ground-penetrating radar showed solid rock for hundreds of feet in every direction. According to their instruments, there was no cave, no chamber, no trapped people, just rock. The official report said the survey team had been caught in a rock slide. Morrison backed up the story. He claimed he didn't remember anything after entering the cave. The mining company paid the families compensation and quietly closed their exploration project. But I knew what I'd seen. And 3 weeks later, I started hearing reports from other rangers in the area. Strange humming sounds coming from mountains near old mining sites. Hikers reporting rocks that seemed to sing when the wind blew through them. Geological survey teams finding mineral formations that didn't match any known patterns. I put together a file with everything I could remember about Thunder Mountain. I documented the singing rocks, the living stone, the people who'd been absorbed. I made copies and hid them in different places, hoping that someday someone would believe the story and know what to look for. Because the mountain is still alive, it's still hungry, and now it knows that people will come looking for the ones it takes. Last month I got a call from a ranger in West Virginia. A survey team had gone missing near an old copper mine. Before they disappeared, they'd reported finding rocks that produced musical tones when struck, rocks that seemed to respond to human voices. I told him to stay away from the site. I told him to call off any rescue attempts until we could bring in military explosives, maybe something strong enough to break up whatever was living in those mountains. He laughed and said I'd been spending too much time alone in the woods. The next day, his radio went silent. I'm writing this down because I think there are more of these things out there. Maybe they've always been there, sleeping in the deep places where copper and iron flow through rock like blood through veins. Maybe our mining operations have been waking them up, one by one. If you're reading this and you hear rocks singing in the mountains, don't go looking for the source. Don't try to investigate. Don't trust anyone who says they want to study it or harvest it or make a deal with it. Just run. And if you can't run, if it's already got you, if you can feel the stone reaching up through your feet and into your bones, well, they say it doesn't hurt. They say you'll live forever, part of something ancient and patient and hungry. But I've seen the look in their eyes, those people trapped in the walls. Living forever isn't always a blessing. My name is Danny McReynolds, and I used to think rocks were just rocks. I know better now. My name is Samuel Crowfoot, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 18 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Poachers, lost hikers, black bears protecting their cubs. Nothing I couldn't handle with common sense and a good rifle. My grandmother used to tell stories about bone walkers and spirits in these woods, but I always figured those were just old tales to keep kids from wandering off alone. I should have listened to her. It was October of 1989 when everything changed. The leaves were turning gold and red, and early snow had started falling on the higher ridges. Perfect tracking weather. That's what made the call from Jake Morrison, the outfitter, so strange. Sam, I got a problem. Jake's voice crackled through the radio at the ranger station. Bill Harrison's hunting party should have been back 3 days ago. 8 experienced guys, and Bill's been hunting these woods since he was 12. Bill Harrison. The name hit me hard. He'd taught me how to track when I was just a kid, back when my Cherokee blood made me an outsider in town. Bill never cared about that stuff. He just saw a boy who wanted to learn the woods. Where'd they head? I asked, already reaching for my pack. Raven's Ridge, that old hunting camp up near the burial grounds. My blood went cold. Even Jake, who wasn't Cherokee, knew better than to mess around up there. The tribal elders had been warning people away from that ridge for as long as anyone could remember. Something about a massacre back in 1838, during the removal. Bodies that never got proper burial. Jake, you know what the elders say about that place? Yeah, well, Bill said it was just superstition. Said the hunting was too good to pass up. Jake paused. Sam, there's something else. When I flew over yesterday to check, I saw their camp. All the gear was still there, but it was arranged funny, like in patterns around the fire pit. I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck that told me something was wrong, really wrong. The drive up to Raven's Ridge took 2 hours on old logging roads that barely deserved the name. As I got higher, the normal sounds of the forest started to fade. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muted, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I'd grown up in these woods, but I'd never heard them this quiet. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was getting low. The old Cherokee trail that led to the ridge was overgrown, but still visible if you knew what to look for. My boots crunched through the early snow as I followed tracks that should have been Bill's party heading in. But there were no tracks heading back out. The silence got thicker as I climbed. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed right. It was like the air itself was watching me. I found their camp just as the last light was fading. Jake was right. All their gear was there. Tents, cooking supplies, enough food for a week. But it was arranged in perfect circles around a cold fire pit, like some kind of ritual. 8 sleeping bags laid out like spokes of a wheel, rifles stacked in precise triangles. Bill would never arrange camp like this. He was practical, efficient. This looked like something out of one of Grandma's old stories. That's when I noticed the bones. Small bones at first, rabbit, squirrel, maybe some bird bones. But they weren't scattered naturally. Someone had arranged them in intricate patterns between the tents, geometric shapes that hurt to look at for too long. They reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. I set up my own tent outside the circle and built a fire. The flames seemed dimmer than they should be, barely pushing back the darkness. I ride my radio, but all I got was static. Then, underneath the white noise, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Tapping. Rhythmic, like drum beats, but not quite right. I knew every sound these woods could make, and this wasn't natural. It sounded like bones clicking together. "Hello?" I called out. "Bill? That you out there?" The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear that tapping again, closer each time. When dawn finally came, I found new bone arrangements around my tent. Larger bones this time. Deer, maybe bear, formed into shapes that almost looked like symbols, Cherokee symbols. I knew I should radio for backup, but the radio was still dead. Besides, Bill and his crew were tough guys. Whatever was going on, they could handle themselves until I found them. I started following their trail up toward the ridge. The tracks were clear enough in the snow. 8 men heading deeper into the woods. But there were other tracks, too. Barefoot human prints that made no sense in this weather. And something else. Drag marks, like someone had been pulling heavy objects along the ground. The trees got older and bigger as I climbed. These were ancient pines that had been here when my ancestors hunted these mountains. The Cherokee believed trees this old had spirits. Looking at them now, twisted and dark against the gray sky, I was starting to think they might be right. That's when I found Mike Patterson. I'd known Mike for 10 years. He was a good hunter, careful and smart. But what I found sitting against an old pine tree wasn't Mike anymore. Not exactly. It looked like Mike. Same face, same clothes, same hunting jacket, but he was empty. Like someone had removed everything inside and left just the skin. When I touched his shoulder, he collapsed inward like a deflated balloon. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. This wasn't possible. People don't just empty out. That's when I saw Mike's skeleton. It was standing 20 feet away between 2 pine trees. Just bones, holding together without muscle or tendon. The skull was turned toward me, and even without eyes, I could feel it watching. As I stared, paralyzed, the skeleton raised one bony arm and pointed deeper into the woods. Then it began to walk, bones clicking with each step. The same sound I'd heard the night before. I should have run. Any sane person would have run. But Bill was still up there somewhere, and I wasn't leaving without him. The skeleton led me up an old game trail I'd never seen before. Every few yards it would stop and turn that eyeless skull toward me, making sure I was following. The clicking of its bones echoed off the trees like some kind of death march. We climbed for an hour before I started seeing the others. More skeletons, moving through the trees like ghosts. Some I recognized, or thought I did. The height and build of Jim Kowalski. The bow-legged stance of Tommy Creek. But they were all bones now, held together by something that wasn't natural. And they weren't alone. Older skeletons moved with them. Bones yellowed with age, some missing pieces. These walked differently, with the proud bearing of warriors. Some wore scraps of old clothing that looked like it was from another time entirely. Cherokee clothing, from before the removal. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. The bone walkers, spirits of those who died violent deaths, unable to rest until justice was done. They could animate the bones of the dead, use them as vessels. I'd always thought they were just stories. The trail led to a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd hunted these woods my whole life. In the center was a massive pile of bones. Not arranged this time, just heaped up like cordwood. Human bones mixed with animal bones, some old, some fresh. And sitting on top of the pile, very much alive, was Joseph Ridgewalker. Joseph was one of our tribal elders. He may be 80 years old, but still sharp as a knife. He looked up as I entered the clearing, and his weathered face showed no surprise. "Sam Crowfoot," he said in Cherokee, "you finally came." "Joseph, what are you doing here? Where's Bill's hunting party?" The old man gestured to the skeletons that had followed me. "They are here. The bone spirits have claimed them." "That's impossible. People don't just turn into bones?" Joseph smiled sadly. "You still don't believe the old stories, do you? Even with the evidence walking around you?" As if responding to his words, more skeletons emerged from the tree line. Dozens of them. Some fresh, still held together by dried sinew. Others so old they seemed to glow in the dim light. All walking with purpose. "This is the place," Joseph continued, "where they slaughtered our people in 1838. Over 200 Cherokee, gunned down as they tried to hide in these mountains. The soldiers didn't even bury them properly, just left them for the animals. I knew the history. Every Cherokee child learned about the Trail of Tears, the forced removal from our ancestral lands. But this... The bone spirits have been waiting," Joseph said, "collecting. Every person who dies on this ridge, their bones join the others. For 150 years, they've been building an army." A new skeleton approached us. This one was different, fresher than Mike Patterson, but wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. As it got closer, I realized it was still alive. Jim Kowalski's skeleton turned its skull toward me, and I heard his voice coming from the bones. "Sam, help me." The voice was weak, terrified. "I can't move. It's controlling me." I reached for my rifle, but Joseph grabbed my arm. "Bullets won't help him. The spirits are in control now." "Then what will help him?" "Nothing. He chose to hunt on sacred ground. This is the price." More skeletons emerged from the woods. I counted at least 40, and more were coming. Some wore the remnants of hunting clothes. Others had scraps of old Cherokee clothing clinging to their bones. A few wore what looked like military uniforms from different eras. "How many?" I whispered. "Everyone who died here since the massacre. Hunters, hikers, even a few soldiers who came looking for deserters during World War II. Joseph stood up slowly. "The bone spirits don't discriminate. Death on sacred ground is death on sacred ground." The skeleton of Jim Kowalski stepped closer. "Sam, it hurts. Please." I raised my rifle, but I couldn't shoot. It was still Jim in there somewhere. That's when I heard Bill's voice. "Sam, over here." I turned and saw him at the edge of the clearing. He looked normal, human, alive. Relief flooded through me. "Bill, thank God. We need to get out of here. Something's wrong with..." "I know." Bill stepped into the clearing, and I saw that he cast no shadow. "I know exactly what's wrong." His skin began to change color, growing pale and translucent. Underneath, I could see bones. "The spirits gave me a choice," Bill said, his voice already sounding distant. "Fight them and become a skeleton slave, or serve willingly and keep my flesh a little longer." "Bill, no. I chose to serve." His skin was nearly transparent now. "They want something from you, Sam. They know you're Cherokee. They know your blood." Joseph nodded grimly. "Your great-grandmother was Little Dove. She survived the massacre here, hid in a cave for 3 days while the soldiers hunted down the others." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" "The spirits told me. They remember her. They remember everyone who lived and everyone who died." Joseph's eyes were sad. "That blood gives you a choice they don't offer others." The skeletons were forming a circle around us now, dozens of them clicking and tapping as they moved. The sound was like a percussion section made of death. "What choice?" I asked. Bill's flesh was almost gone now, just a thin layer of her bones. Join them willingly and keep your mind. Fight them and become a slave like the others. Or, his voice was barely a whisper. Or what? Joseph answered. Or help them finish what they started. They don't just want to collect bones, Sam. They want justice. They want revenge for the massacre. The bone spirits were communicating now, tapping out complex rhythms on their ribs, their skulls, the trees around us. It sounded almost like language, Cherokee language. They're planning something, I said. A march, Joseph confirmed. Down to the towns below. They have enough bones now to raise an army. Every person who's died on this ridge for a century and a half. They want to pay back what was done to our people. I looked at the skeletons surrounding us. Jim Kowalski, still begging for help. Mike Patterson's bones, standing silent and patient. Bill, now just another walking skeleton but still aware. And behind them, the older bones. Cherokee warriors who'd been waiting over a century for justice. How many people live in the valley? I asked. Thousands, Joseph said quietly. The percussion of bones grew louder, more urgent. They were getting ready to move. The largest skeleton stepped forward, and I knew immediately this was their leader. It wore the remnants of a Cherokee war shirt and carried itself with the dignity of a chief. When it spoke, the voice came from all the bones around us, a chorus of the dead. Samuel Crowfoot, son of Margaret Crowfoot, great-grandson of Little Dove who hid in the caves while her people died. The voice was ancient, hollow, filled with decades of rage and sorrow. You know why we have waited. You know what was taken from us. I did know. Every Cherokee knew. Our land, our homes, our lives. Hundreds of thousands forced from their ancestral grounds, thousands dead on the trail west, and here on this ridge, a whole band of Cherokee massacred for refusing to leave. But this isn't justice, I said. Killing innocent people won't bring back the dead. Innocent? The bone chorus laughed, and it was the sound of wit and through empty skulls. They live on our stolen land. They profit from our bones buried beneath their towns. They have forgotten us entirely. More skeletons emerged from the forest. I thought there were dozens, but now I realized there were hundreds, maybe thousands. They filled the clearing and stretched back into the trees as far as I could see. Every person who died on this ridge, the chief's skeleton continued. Cherokee, white, black, young, old. Death makes us equal. Death makes us army. Joseph stepped forward. There is another way, the proper way. The bone army turned toward him as one, a forest of empty skulls. I offer myself freely, Joseph said in Cherokee. Take my bones, but let the boy choose his own path. Let him serve as he sees fit. Joseph, no. But the old man was already walking toward the bone chief. I am elder of the Eastern Cherokee. I have authority to speak for the living. The skeleton chief considered this. Around us, the bone army began tapping out new rhythms, discussing in their percussion language. You would give your bones willingly, the chief asked. If it prevents a massacre of innocents, yes. Joseph began removing his clothes with calm dignity. As each piece fell away, his skin began to change, becoming pale and translucent like Bill's had. Sam, Joseph said, his voice already growing distant. You have a choice. Help them find proper burial for the massacre victims, and they will rest. Ignore them, and they will take their revenge on the living. His flesh was fading fast now. There is a cave where your great-grandmother hid. The bones of the original victims are still there, still waiting for proper burial rites. Joseph's skeleton stepped forward, his bones now gleaming white. But unlike the others, his posture remained proud, unbowed. He had chosen this. Show me, I said. The bone army began to move, not down to, toward the towns, but deeper into the mountains. They flowed between the trees like a river of death, their clicking and tapping echoing off the rocks. I followed, Joseph's skeleton beside. Me. He moved differently now, with the ancient dignity of the bone walkers, but I could still sense the man he'd been in the way he occasionally glanced back to make sure I was keeping up. We climbed for what felt like hours. The path was treacherous, winding between massive boulders and around deep crevasses. This wasn't a place living people were meant to go. Finally, we reached a cave mouth hidden behind a waterfall that had mostly frozen in the cold. The Bone Army stopped, forming ranks outside the cave like honor guards. Inside, I found them, the original victims of the 1838 massacre. Over 200 skeletons, Cherokee men, women, and children, huddled together where they'd tried to hide from the soldiers. Some still held each other. A mother's bones cradled the tiny skeleton of an infant. These bones were different from the others. They didn't move or speak. They just lay there, waiting, abandoned, forgotten. They cannot become bone walkers, Joseph's skeleton explained, his voice now part of the chorus but still distinct. They died too quickly, too violently. Their spirits are trapped with their bones, unable to rest, unable to seek justice. I understood now. The bone walkers weren't the massacre victims. They were the spirits of those who died later, Cherokee and non-Cherokee alike, all bound together by the injustice that started here. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "You know the old ceremonies. Your grandmother taught you." She had, though I'd never paid much attention. Cherokee burial rites, songs for the dead, prayers to help spirits find their way to the nightland. I can't remember all the words. The bones will remember. Your great-grandmother is here. Her spirit knows the way. I knelt among the skeletons and began to sing. The Cherokee death song my grandmother had taught me when I was small. At first my voice cracked and wavered, but as I continued, other voices joined in. The Bone Army outside the cave began to sing too, their voices creating harmonies that echoed through the mountains. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I'd ever heard. As we sang, something changed in the cave. The bones began to glow with soft light, and I could see them, not as skeletons, but as they had been in life. Cherokee families dressed in traditional clothing, their faces peaceful now instead of terrified. Among them, I saw a young woman who looked like my grandmother, Little Dove. She smiled at me and nodded. The ceremony took all night, song after song, prayer after prayer, calling each spirit by name and helping them find their way to rest. As each one passed on, their bones crumbled to dust, finally free of the earth that had held them prisoner for so long. When dawn broke, the cave was empty except for dust and memories. I walked out of the cave to find the Bone Army waiting in perfect formation. But they were different now, peaceful. The rage that had driven them for over a century was gone. One by one, they began to fall apart. Not violently, but gently, like autumn leaves drifting to the ground. Jim Kowalski's skeleton looked at me one last time and mouthed, "Thank you," before crumbling to dust. Mike Patterson's bones collapsed with what sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Bill's skeleton held together longest. He walked over to me and somehow managed to smile despite having no flesh. "Thanks, Sam," he said in a voice like wind through dry leaves, "for not giving up on us." Then he too crumbled, his bones joining the dust of the others. Joseph's skeleton was the last to go. "It is finished," he said. "The massacre victims are at rest. The bone walkers have no more purpose." "What about you?" I asked. "I chose this path, but my choice is fulfilled." He looked toward the rising sun. "I can rest now too." And with that, the last of the bone walkers crumbled to dust. I hiked back down to my truck as the sun climbed higher. The forest was alive again, birds singing, squirrels chattering, wind rustling through the leaves. The silence that had blanketed the ridge was gone. At the ranger station, I filed my report. 8 hunters lost in an avalanche, bodies never recovered. It was a lie, but it was a lie that let families have closure without having to believe in bone walkers and Cherokee spirits. 3 months later, I convinced the state to designate Ravens Ridge as a Cherokee memorial site. No more hunting, no more development. Just a place where the dead could finally rest in peace. I still work as a ranger, but I'm different now. I listen to the old stories with new ears. I pay attention when the elders speak of sacred places and ancient spirits. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can hear echoes of the Bone Walkers' songs drifting through the mountains. My grandmother always said the dead don't really leave us. They just wait in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. I keep her stories alive now. Tell them to anyone who'll listen, because some secrets are too important to bury, even when they're made of bones and sorrow and justice, too long delayed. The bone collectors of Ravens Ridge are gone, their purpose fulfilled. But somewhere in these ancient mountains, other spirits are waiting, other injustices seeking resolution. And when they call, I'll be ready to listen.